book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Proof of Conspiracy, How Trump's International Collusion is Threatening American Democracy by Seth Abramson. This is from the introduction. In late 2015, after Donald Trump has formally announced his candidacy for president, a geopolitical conspiracy emerges overseas, whose key participants are the leaders of Russia, Israel, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt. These 6 men decide that Trump is the antidote to their ills. For Russia, U.S. sanctions. For Israel, the lack of Arab allies. For Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Egypt, perceived threats emanating from Iran. The conspirators commit themselves to doing whatever is necessary to ensure that Donald Trump is elected. Trump's presidential campaign is aware of and benefits from this conspiracy both before and after the 2016 election. On March 19, 2018, British journalist David Hirst, the former chief foreign leader writer for The Guardian, publishes the most important report of his career. Hirst, at one time the Moscow bureau chief at The Guardian, is now editor-in-chief of his own publishing venture, a London-based Middle East watchdog called the Middle East Eye. In the spring of 2018, he reports the existence of a years-long, continent-spanning conspiracy that will eventually envelop the President of the United States, the Red Sea Conspiracy. This book denominates the conspiracy Hirst uncovers as the Red Sea Conspiracy for the simple reason that it is hatched on a yacht in the middle of the Red Sea, a seawater inlet of the Indian Ocean bordered by, among other countries, Saudi Arabia and Egypt. One imagines that in his many years as a correspondent and commentator for The Scotsman, The Huffington Post, Al Jazeera, El Arabi, El Jaid, TRT World, which is Turkish, Masr al-Aghan, Egypt, and The Guardian, Hirst never thought he'd stumble on a story as far-reaching in its implications as the Red Sea Conspiracy. But he did, and what he found could change the course of history. This book chronicles the events around the globe that preceded and followed the fall 2015 origin of the conspiracy, with a special focus on how the conspiracy prompted Donald Trump and his aides, allies, and associates to covertly collude with 6 countries, both before and after the 2016 presidential election: Russia, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Israel, Bahrain, and Egypt. Events that began on the Red Sea in 2015 now influence President Trump's foreign policy toward all of these countries, toward other countries not involved in the conspiracy, such as Qatar and Iran, and more broadly toward Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. The story of the Red Sea Conspiracy begins with a man named George Nader. As reported by Hirst in the Middle East Eye, toward the end of 2015, Nader, then an advisor to the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, known as MBZ, convened, with his patron's permission, a summit of some of the Middle East's most powerful leaders. Gathered on a boat in the Red Sea in the fall of 2015 were Mohammed bin Salman, known as MBS, Deputy Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who would shortly become the heir apparent to the throne of the Saudi kingdom. MZB himself, by 2015 the de facto ruler of the United Arab Emirates. Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, the president of Egypt. Prince Salman bin Hamad, the crown prince of Bahrain. And King Abdullah II of Jordan. Nader, the improbable maestro of these rulers' clandestine get-together, intended the plan he posed to the men to include the nation of Libya, but no representative from that nation attended the gathering. Of the leaders aboard the yacht, 2, MBS and MBZ, are already close. According to a New Yorker interview with Richard A. Clarke, a counterterrorism advisor to Presidents Barack Obama and George W. Bush, MBS and MBZ, quote, talk on the phone all day to each other, end quote. The Red Sea meeting, although technically convened by Nader, is a means for MBZ to advance ambitions that he and MBS have designed together. The 2 Sunni Arab leaders' intention, Hirst records, is to remake the Middle East with the covert assistance of a highly placed American politician. They intend to do this by first renaming and reconstituting the membership of the 6-member Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC, which in 2015 comprises Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, and Qatar, while reorienting, too, its regional ambitions and global alliances. The proposed GCC realignment would evict Kuwait, Oman, and Qatar from the Council and replace these three countries with Egypt, Jordan, and Libya, thereby eliminating the entity's historical association with the Persian Gulf and remaking it as, instead, an alliance constituting, quote, an elite regional group of 6 countries which would supplant the GCC and form the nucleus of a coalition of pro-U.S. and pro-Israeli states in the Middle East, end quote. According to 2 sources briefed on the 2015 Red Sea Summit, quote, Nader said this group of states could become a force in the region that the United States government could depend on to counter the influence of Turkey and Iran, end quote. Prior to 2015, Turkey and Saudi Arabia had intermittently enjoyed strong diplomatic ties. The book Proof of Conspiracy by Seth Abramson.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy Friday, TGIF, Shabbat Shalom, Juma Mubarak, whatever it may be for you. It is Anything Goes Friday, although we do have a bunch of people who are going to drop by today. Krystal Ball is going to be with us at the bottom of this hour. In the second hour of the program, Daniel Judt is going to be with us. He's with The Nation magazine, reporting on, they've got this cover story, Australia is burning, and I want to get into that. Cenk Uygur is going to drop by at the bottom of the next hour at 10:30 Pacific, was at 1:30 Eastern time. And you're going to hear from Sean Taylor this afternoon in our third hour. So that's what's going on. Just to bring you up to date on all the news, as it were. The impeachment news, and like I said, it's Anything Goes Friday. You can call on any topic you want. You want to discuss impeachment, you want to discuss UFOs, it's pigeons or robots from the planet Xenu, whatever you'd like. I just wanted to highlight something that just, is something that I just think is one of these good things. Joe Madison, who is one of my colleagues on Sirius XM, he does a show every morning on Sirius XM from 6 to 10 a.m. on the Urban Channel, which is, I think, 126, and on Sirius XM, and just an extraordinary man. And his wife Sherry is an extraordinary woman, and they put together every single day one of the best radio programs in the country, period, full stop. And if you've never heard Joe's show, you need to check it out in the morning, But Joe was on our program a week or so ago, and on MLK Day, actually, and was talking about this petition to rename the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Edmund Pettus was a Civil War, well, even prior to the Civil War, which is he was, or maybe after. I'm sorry, I don't recall all the details. But Edmund Pettus was just a screaming right-wing racist, and he was the head of the Klan in Alabama or Mississippi, and we want to rename this bridge after John Lewis. It just seems like a reasonable thing. So I just wanted to highlight that and tell you that you can go over to joemadison.com and get all the information on that and on Joe's show and on everything that Joe is up to, because it's a worthy cause. Donald Trump last night said in Iowa, he went to Iowa and had a good-sized rally. And he said that the Democrats want to kill your cows. Now, there's a lot of cows in Iowa. I don't know if there's more cows than people, but there's a lot of cows in Iowa. It's a very, it's a rural farming state. But then he got into this kind of, what Hitler said about the Jews territory. He said they want to kill your cows and you're next. They want to wipe Iowa off the map. We need to take this kind of stuff seriously. This kind of talk leads to very, very, very dark places. Very dangerous places. I talked yesterday about the possibility that Donald Trump could suspend the 2020 election or postpone it. And several people sent me and tip of the hat and thank you to all of them, 2 of our program directors, in fact, of our radio stations. This CRS report, and somebody posted on Twitter too, The Congressional Research Service does research on behalf of Congress. You have to be a member of Congress to ask them to do something, but they do these research reports. And back in 2004, when there was some speculation because Bush and Cheney were starting to become very unpopular as a result of having lied us into the war, both wars actually, they lied us into the war in Afghanistan, saying that it was the only way to go after bin Laden after Mullah Omar said he'd be glad to arrest bin Laden and turn him over to us. And then they lied us into the war in Iraq because, Dick Cheney had been spending most of 2001 before 9/11 dividing up the oil fields with a bunch of oil executives. Cheney, of course, was the former head of Enron, and George W. Bush himself was a former oil executive. He owned a little oil company in Texas. So anyhow, in July of 2004, the Congressional Research Service issued a report, you can DuckDuckGo it, titled Executive Branch Power to Postpone Elections. And I'll just, cut right to the chase. They say that the president does not apparently, now keep in mind, when they say apparently, that means, in Donald Trump's mind, that means, I don't care. Well, here's the actual language. The executive branch does not appear to currently have the authority to establish or postpone the dates of elections at either the federal or state level in the event of an emergency situation. However, Congress may delegate power to the executive branch so long as it includes standards set so that a court could ascertain whether the will of Congress has been obeyed. In other words, Congress has to explicitly say, we're giving this power to the president. And this, they say, under Article 1, Section 4, and under Article 2, Section 1, this would be constitutional. Thus, as long as the Congress sets standards for the executive branch to implement such a postponement, it would appear that Congress could enact a statute delegating the authority to postpone an election to the executive branch. And of course, once that's done, just like Congress delegated the authority to the president to fight wars against the people who attacked us on 9/11, this was in 2002. Barbara Lee was the only person in the House who voted against it. And that resolution has been used now for, 6 wars? And Trump just used it to assassinate Soleimani. So bizarre stuff. But it gets even more bizarre when you ask Republicans about this. And this is from the Washington Post. And this is from 2017, from August of 2017. But it's the Washington Post. And what they found was that, Donald Trump has repeatedly said that he actually won the popular vote. Hillary Clinton did not win the popular vote by 5 million votes. No, Donald Trump won it because the 3 million vote margin that Hillary Clinton had, Trump said, was mostly attributable, or is entirely attributable to, quote, illegals voting in the election, people who are here without documentation. And it turns out they did a study on thousands of Americans. It lasted from June 5th to June 20th of 2017. The sample was weighted to match the population of the United States in terms of sex, age, race, and education. The 2 questions they asked were, first, if Donald Trump were to say that the 2020 presidential election should be postponed until the country can make sure that only eligible American citizens can vote, would you support or oppose postponing the election? And then the second question that they asked was, what if both Donald Trump and Republicans in Congress were to say that the 2020 presidential election should be postponed until the country can make sure that only eligible American citizens can vote? Would you support or oppose postponing the election in that case? 47% of Republicans said Trump can postpone elections by decree, all by himself. Excuse me, no, let me start over here. It's even worse than that. 47% of Republicans said that Trump won the popular vote. 68% of Republicans believe that illegal immigrants routinely vote, and 73% of Republicans believe that voter fraud is a serious problem and happens somewhat or very often. 73%. Now, can Trump postpone the election? 52% of the Republicans said that they support Donald Trump postponing the 2020 election. 56% said that if Congress goes along with it, they super support it. So a significant majority of Republicans support Trump and the Republicans postponing the election, and a small majority of Republicans support just Trump postponing the elections. So that's what I've got. I mean, breaking news over on the Washington Post, they're reporting that sources within the Trump administration are saying that it's entirely possible that because of the dispute over the rules in the Senate about whether or not individual senators are going to have a chance to give floor speeches about supporting Trump or opposing Trump, and whether they're going to drag. This is even without witnesses. They're saying that the trial may last until next Wednesday. So Trump will not be able, if this happens, Trump will not be able to use the State of the Union address as a rally. And I think that there's enough Republicans who are uncomfortable with how he might do that. I think that this is what I think is going on. The Democrats, of course, are fine with, having the trial last longer. I think that some of the Republicans will go along with it because they are afraid. They know how unpredictable Trump is. They know what a narcissist he is. They know what a crazy man. I mean, last night saying the Democrats want to kill Republicans. I mean, Trump saying that. They're afraid of what he might say at the State of the Union address. And so they want to, I believe, this is my opinion, but I think it's the best explanation for the possibility that this might happen being leaked by the White House. And they wouldn't leak it unless they were pretty sure it was going to happen. I think they're just trying to, get ahead of Mitch McConnell or take the sting off it so it doesn't look like McConnell is betraying Trump. I think that the Republicans are actually afraid of what he might do on Tuesday night with the State of the Union. And also, this is a way to screw, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, the Democrat, and Amy Klobuchar, the Democratic candidates for president who are stuck in the Senate. So it's kind of a twofer. They get it all. Anyhow, I'll pick up your calls right after this break. It's 17 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Anything Goes Friday. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
As the impeachment trial of Donald Trump, actually the removal from office trial, he's already been impeached, rolls on. And welcome back. Let's see here, Lydia in Port Angeles, Washington. Hey, Lydia, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's in your mind?
Hi, Tom. My pleasure. Happy Friday.
Thank you.
I just want to say I loved your image last week on Friday of you celebrating over a candlelight and a glass of organic wine with your wife. And I just really appreciate how often you mention your wife and give her credit for being your great partner in life. So
she is.
Anyway, I imagine. My husband is the great-great-grandson of Chief Seattle.
Wow.
Yeah, and so I know you're coming to Seattle on your book tour in a couple of weeks, and it's always great to see in your promotion for the book that you mention Native Americans, so I really look forward to reading it. I wish I could come to the town hall, but I don't think I'll be able to make it. But he's in a tribe called the Duwamish, which lost their federal recognition back in the early 70s, mid-70s. I think it was 74, the Bolt decision, where they divided up all the shellfish rights and hunting grounds and everything between the different tribes. But whenever a tribe didn't have a reservation, they were told they didn't exist.
Wow.
So, yeah. So he lived till he was about the age of 17, getting a measly monthly check as a Duwamish person, and then it got cut off. Well, he's a half-breed, or a little less than half, I should say. It had a hard life because of it, but in many ways, they've been fighting it in court to get their recognition back for 35 years or so, and it hasn't happened. It happened briefly at the end of the Clinton administration that they passed it on some bill, and then as soon as Bush came in, turned it around and canceled it. So they do have a longhouse in West Seattle that in that little brief interim, they got some grant money to build a longhouse, so it is there. But anyway, the chief had this amazing speech, I'm sure you know about, in 1854 when he was being offered a reservation.
This is the one where he said something like, "You can't eat money." Is that?
Yeah, and the land is not for sale.
Right.
Yeah. There was a lot of things. It was very prophetic. So I started thinking about it last Monday on Martin Luther King Day about his speech, "I Have a Dream." Somebody called in and said, well, you can't have a dream unless you're asleep or something. It's a fantasy or whatever. But I started thinking about Chief Seattle's speech, and I went to my bookshelf, and I opened up a Time Life book of the great chieftains in this whole series of books on Native Americans, and there's no mention of him even in there. Luckily, I had another little copy of a booklet just of the speech itself, and it's so prophetic. It's such a vision, and he was so humble and yet trusting. But anyway, you were talking about treason yesterday, so I looked that up in the dictionary, and it's betrayal of trust. And it was so blatant with these people, and especially now where my husband has to go buy, a regular hunting, fishing license as a, regular non-native person would. But anyway, I'm going on and on, but I hope that you will consider when you're in Seattle to, find out more about the chief, because they put the seal of his face on all the city hall walls, and yet...
Your great-grandfather. Yeah. That's
great-grandfather,
great-grandfather. Yeah, that's remarkable.
Yeah.
Lydia, thanks for the call. Thanks for the heads up, and yes, I'll look into that. Thank you very much.
Okay,
it's great talking with you.
Have a great day.
Thanks, you too. Bye-bye. Our free Hartmann Report podcast recaps the show every day. It's available wherever you find great podcasts. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. So welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and James in Chicago. Hey, James, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Good. What's up?
Yes, I want to bring up two things. One is for my African American brothers and sisters who are voting for Biden. My question to you is, are you voting for him because he championed your issues, or is it because Barack Obama picked him? Now, I would suggest that it's probably because Barack picked him. And what I want to say to that is this. Our good president, he was okay, but Barack always took the path of least resistance when it came to the Republicans. So he picked Biden because he left the least bitter taste. That's why he picked him, okay? So you may want to consider that when you're voting.
James, there's a third reason why, in my opinion, and not being African American, I might be just profoundly uninformed about this, but my guess is that the third reason would be Joe Biden for 8 years was vice president of the United States. He, therefore, is a known quantity. He didn't blow anything up. He wasn't an idiot. He held the office and comported himself well. And there's little doubt that he could step into the White House and be president from day one. And I think that's actually probably one of the, not to mention the fact that he was the vice president to our first black president. But I think that's probably
I don't disagree with you
the main rationale.
I don't disagree with you.
Yeah, okay.
But I think that by and large, it was because he picked him. And like I said, Barack took the path of least resistance. Yeah. Also, I want to comment on Trump, and I'm surprised. you brought this up on Tuesday, and I used to yell and scream at you when you said that Bernie took 23 states. And I should say, well, wait a minute, Tom, why aren't you saying that he probably could have taken more if states like New York had open primaries? Because independents, if you were not Democrats, you couldn't vote.
Right.
So he might have taken more states. And I know everybody else would say that, but I say, Tom, why aren't you saying he could have taken more?
Well, it's probably true, James, but I have no specific evidence of that. Although in the states that do have open primaries, like Michigan, for example, and Wisconsin, I believe Wisconsin has an open primary. There was only one county that Bernie didn't win in Wisconsin, which is pretty mind-boggling. I mean, point that Mark Pocan makes all the time. We'll see how it shakes out.
That's why I say probably. That's why I say probably. I didn't say he could. I said probably.
Krystal Ball did a deep dive into this over at Hill TV. They've got this morning show that she and this other guy do, and in fact, she's going to be on our program in about 5 minutes. And what they found when they actually dug into the research and the surveys was that if Bernie Sanders is the nominee, and I'm guessing that if Warren was, if these questions were framed about Warren, the answers would be the same, but they only did it with Bernie. If Bernie was the nominee, what they found was that virtually 100% of all people who identify as Democrats, even the hardcore supporters of Joe Biden and some of the other candidates, all of them said that they would vote for Bernie. And one woman made the comment, I'd vote for my dog over Donald Trump. So all of them will vote for Bernie. Among the elites, that is the commentators on TV and the multimillionaires, among the elites, there was a lot of hand-wringing, but most of them would vote for Bernie. So, I think that we just need to figure out who our candidate is going to be. And if progressives can hold together, Warren supporters stay strong, Bernie supporters stay strong until the convention, so that we can, between the two of them, they can control a 2,000 vote block at the convention, because it takes 2 out of the 4,000 votes to do anything. And then Warren and Sanders can negotiate how they're going to do this. That's how we need to do it, in my opinion. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Krystal Ball is going to drop by in just a minute about the Pppulist Guide to 2020, and then we'll continue taking your calls, too, so stick around. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment by yours truly. This is from Chapter 1, The Unholy Alliance of Racism, Genocide, and Guns. In Isaiah 14:21, the Lord tells Isaiah, "Prepare for his sons a place of slaughter because of the iniquity of their fathers." It's a variation on the old story of karma and seems in a very real way to be playing out today in the United States. America is facing an epidemic. Public health officials use that word, of gun-related suicides, accidents, and even homicides and police killings. That epidemic has grown worse in the past decade, largely because the number of guns in America has increased, in large part because of the racial fears of white men who have bought guns in record numbers for 8 years during the time in office of America's first black president. A landmark 1999 study from researchers Franklin Zimmering and Gordon Hawkins showed that the main correlation, far surpassing mental illness, socioeconomic status, or race, that could be defined as causal in predicting the rates of gun deaths, is a simple number: the number of guns distributed among society. In the 30 years since that study, Zimmering and Hawkins' results have been replicated and reanalyzed dozens of times. As the American Academy of Pediatrics said in a release published in AAAS's Science magazine, quote, "New research shows dramatic differences in the number of children hospitalized and killed each year in the U.S. from firearm-related injuries based on their state's gun legislation, even after adjusting for poverty, unemployment, and education rates. It found twice as many pediatric firearm deaths in states with the most lenient gun regulations compared to states where gun laws are strictest," end quote. They added that this is a critical issue for children, quoting Stephanie Cho, MD, the lead author of the abstract, quote, Firearm-related injuries are the second leading cause of death among children in the United States. But we found a clear discrepancy in where those deaths happen that corresponds with the strengths of states' firearm legislation. In states with lenient laws, children die at alarmingly greater rates, end quote. And unsurprisingly, America not only has unusually lenient gun laws, but also has more guns in civilian hands than any other country in the world. America has a bit more than 4% of the world's population, but holds almost 50% of all the guns in civilian hands worldwide, more than 390 million guns. And the more guns a society has, the more gun deaths it will experience. The NRA and their army of lobbyists have been quite successful in making this happen. During Obama's presidency, there was a steady and hysterical drumbeat of articles, emails, and political proclamations by so-called pro-gun politicians and think tanks, suggesting that Obama was preparing to take away everyone's guns at any minute. There was even a subtext embraced by the hard right that he wasn't going to stop there. After disarming white Americans, these folks said, Obama was going to intern them in otherwise unused FEMA camps. Flipped-out gun owners were repeatedly arrested during the Obama years trying to break into retired or temporarily vacant military facilities and toxic waste sites, looking for evidence to prove that Obama was, in fact, preparing the modern-day version of the World War II-era Japanese internment camps. White supremacy was the founding notion of this nation. White Europeans thought themselves so superior to the human beings they met here in 1492 that Columbus himself became the first North American slaver, shipping Taino Indians back to Spain as slaves to the royal family. A slave is as good as gold, Columbus wrote for the king and queen. Europeans in the Americas then stepped up that game into a hemisphere-wide campaign of racial genocide, pulling off the largest multi-generational mass murder in the history of the world. In the midst of that effort, they also created the legal mechanisms necessary to define and legally regulate slavery, and even built those systems into America's founding document, the Constitution. America was birthed in slavery and genocide, and both needed guns. It was the superior weaponry of guns that gave the European settlers a massive advantage over the bow and arrow-equipped Native Americans, and it was the raw power of widespread white ownership of guns in the South that propped up the institution of slavery for hundreds of years. Without guns, neither would have been possible, or at least neither would have been as easy as they were to pull off. And now, after centuries of guns being used to kill off and keep down people of color in America, those same guns are creating a terrifying epidemic of gun-facilitated violence, from public schools to private homes and public concerts. It's enough to make one think that Isaiah was onto something. Chapter 2, The Sanitized History of America. The United States' expansion and conquest in the late 18th century through the 19th century and into the 20th century is a history written by white men, inked in the blood of Native Americans, and built on the broken and bloody backs of enslaved people brought here from Africa. From 1791, when the Bill of Rights went into effect, until the end of the Civil War, the Second Amendment protected the rights only of white men to own guns. This is simply because until the ratification of the 14th Amendment, states determined who was recognized as a person protected under the Constitution. Initially, in most states, that meant that white men who owned land and paid taxes were the only people considered full citizens under the Constitution. In the South, white men with guns formed slave patrols to control slaves and formed posses to hunt escaped slaves. The book, The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters Series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. And just to put a punctuation mark on that, I'll also be in Los Angeles. We're doing this collaboratively with KPFK as a fundraiser for the station on the 15th, Saturday the 15th at the Sportsman's Lodge Hotel. There's information at kpfk.org. Speaking of books, there's a new book out that you're going to want to check out. It's really great. It's The Pppulist Guide to 2020. A New Right and a New Left Are Rising is the title of the book. And it's by Krystal Ball and Sagar Enjeti, if I'm saying that right. And on the line with us is Krystal Ball herself. Hey, Krystal. Great to have you with us.
Hey, Tom. Great to be with you. And by the way, you nailed it. Sagar Enjeti. You got it perfectly.
Great. Thank you. Good. I'm glad. And by the way, I tweeted, for people who follow us on Twitter, I tweeted a short video from your show. You do a TV show every morning on Hill TV, and along with Sagar, I believe. And you did this deep dive into how the Democratic Party would react to a Bernie Sanders candidacy that I thought was absolutely screaming brilliant. And
thank you.
So,
that means a lot coming from you. Thank you.
Well, people need to go check it out. You've got a great show, and it was a great rant. So let's get to your book, The Pppulist Guide of 2020. You talk about the new right and the new left are rising. Specifically, who are and what is the new left, and who are and what is the new right?
Well, I think it's emerging as we speak. Part of why we really rushed to get this book out into the political process right now, because at our show Rising, we have a very unusual dynamic. You know, I'm on the populist left. I'm a sort of Sanders-type Democrat. I like all the anti-establishment candidates in the primary. Sagar is on this new populist right that's really trying to find its way. That, look, yes, the most visible manifestation of right now is Donald Trump, but there's a whole movement there that doesn't agree with necessarily everything Donald Trump is doing. And essentially our thesis is, look, all the pundits got everything wrong in 2016, right? They didn't see Sanders coming. They didn't see Trump coming. They wrote off the whole thing right up until the election results smacked them in the faces. And there's been no self-reflection about how they were able to get things so wrong. Our thesis in the book is that you can't understand what's happening in American politics and accurately predict what is going to happen in American politics without digging deep into this populist anger that is animating politics right now here in this country and really truly around the world. So as we've been watching the primary unfold at our show Rising, we've been able to accurately predict a lot of the candidates that didn't catch on, the different coalitions that supported candidates in surprising ways, candidates who ultimately dropped out. We've been able to predict a lot of those movements and ultimately the surge of Bernie Sanders because we were filtering it through this lens of populism. So we wanted to lay it down into sort of lessons that you could look at and use to hopefully understand American politics a little better and predict what the future might look like.
And you've done a brilliant job of it. We're talking with Krystal Ball, the co-host of Rising on Hill TV, and the book is The Pppulist Guide to 2020. My theory on this, Krystal, and I'd love to get your response to this. In 1976, in a decision called Buckley versus Vallejo, the Supreme Court, for the very first time in the history of the United States, said that if a billionaire wants to put enough money into a politician that they essentially own that politician, that is no longer called corruption and it's no longer called bribery. It's called free speech under the First Amendment. It's protected by the Constitution. 2 years later, a decision called First National Bank versus Bellotti in 1978, the Supreme Court extended that logic to corporations. This caused a flood of big money to pour into the political process. The Democrats at that point were largely supported by the labor unions, and so they kind of ignored this. at least until 1992 when Bill Clinton said, no, we've got to get in on this corporate money thing. But the Democrats ignored it, but the Republicans put up a for sale sign because they were, in the wilderness. Jerry Ford had lost the election to Jimmy Carter in '76. They were freaked out. And so the Republican Party became basically the party of the billionaires and corporations, totally sold out. And by 92, 93, about half of the Democratic Party, in fact, arguably even 3/4 at that time, I think it's about half now, decided to get in on the act and sell out. And the result of that is that Gillens and Page study in 2014 at Northwestern and Princeton universities, where they found that over the last 20 years, roughly, since these two decisions, and they were amplified by Citizens United in 2010, basically over the last 20 years, the desires of the top 10% are likely to be made into legislation. The desires of the top 1% are almost certainly made into legislation. The desires of the bottom 90% of Americans for the last 20 to 25 years, if you look at the statistics, the surveys, and the legislation that's coming out, are about as likely to be made into law as random noise. And the desires of the bottom 50% of Americans are less likely to be made into law than random noise. And voters have figured this out. And when Donald Trump said the system is rigged, he was right. And when Bernie Sanders said the system is rigged, he was right. And people are pissed off, and they want their elected representatives to do what they want, not what the people who own them want. I lay all this at the feet of the Supreme Court, frankly, in the last book I wrote, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. But that's my take on why this populist eruption is happening. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you nail it, right? It's pretty simple, ultimately. People are pissed off because Washington's not listening to them. And essentially you have two parties that are fighting for who can do the most for the wealthiest and cut taxes the most for corporations. There's a mythology that Washington is gridlocked. And it does seem that way, especially as you watch, the impeachment trial unfolding. But it's only an illusion because they are gridlocked on the things that you want them to be working on. When it comes to passing trade deals that decimated our country, when it comes to banking deregulation, when it comes to endless wars, there has been very much a bipartisan consensus in this town. So our book is about what if these parties realign to the point where instead of fighting over who could do the most and gain the most wealthy donors, what if the fight was over who could actually garner the support of the working class? How could we put the working class back at the center of power in D.C.? And, Tom, you're right to point out, look, my expectations for the Republican Party are very low. They've been part of the rich for a long time. I don't expect them to be the part of the people. But that's why I focus so much energy on the Democratic Party, because this is supposed to be the party of the people. And so when they realigned away from the working class, you basically left the working class with no real voice that would fight for their economic interests. So I think that's at the core of what this election is about. And I think it's at the core of why you have 70% of Americans who say they have a boiling anger at the political establishment. So our view is not a fringe view. It is, in fact, the mainstream view of the country, which is why your show is so popular and so successful and important. It's why Rising has quickly found this unbelievably engaged audience. And this book, which, frankly, we put out without a big rollout, we've got a little tiny publishing imprint that's backing us, no PR release, no galleys went out to anyone, skyrocketed to the top 5 in the nation on all of Amazon because of the energy of this movement and the desire for a non-corrupt form of politics that would center the working class.
Yeah, it's absolutely extraordinary. I think you've absolutely nailed it too. And great show, Rising on Hill TV, I was going to say an even better book. They're both great. The Populist Guide to 2020, A New Right and A New Left are rising by Krystal Ball and Sagar Enjeti. And Krystal, thanks so much for dropping by today.
Thank you, Tom. It's my pleasure.
It's great having you on the program. And I wish you the very, very best. We'll be back with Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. It's 43 minutes past the hour. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archive.
Back with your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Jared in Downington, Pennsylvania. Hey, Jared, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Hello, Tom. I want to talk about the Iowa caucuses on Monday.
Uh-huh.
Why I think it's so essential, why we need to get Bernie as the nominee. I know you take a position that you're not going to endorse until the candidate has basically.
Well, I've quasi-endorsed both Bernie and Warren, and particularly after this breakfast meeting that I had Sunday with one of the more senior officials in the DNC and also in the Bernie campaign. And what I learned was that there's no way that either Bernie or Elizabeth Warren can go to that convention with 2,000 delegates. It's just not going to happen. But the two of them, and 2,000 delegates is what it's going to take to prevent a second vote. And the second vote is where almost 800 super delegates come in, who are virtually all committed to, a Biden-Klobuchar type of ticket. The only way to get to that 2,000 to stop that second vote is for Bernie and Elizabeth Warren to join forces and negotiate who's going to be at the top of the ticket and who's going to do what at the convention. So we have to continue to support both, in my opinion. But to you, Jared.
Well, I mean, I agree 100% with what you're saying. We need to build a coalition, and we need to win outright. And I don't think, if Warren wants to stay in the race, fine, but we need to be very strategic with our voting and where we're voting in precincts and how we're doing. And I think Bernie could win this outright, even with 2,000 delegates. I mean, I really do. I mean, if you look at, he's doing good in Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada. I think he's in second place in South Carolina, and that's going to pick up if he, wins more victories.
Yep.
And, we really have to have Bernie as the nominee.
I think he's got the strongest chance of beating Donald Trump. And I think Elizabeth Warren has a very strong chance of beating Elizabeth Trump as well. But Bernie is, people are more familiar with Bernie. He ran 4 years ago. He got a lot of publicity. A lot of people came out and voted for him. A surprising number of people that I knew back when Louise and I were living on a boat at the Capitol Yacht Club and hanging out with all these guys who are, military and ex-military. I recall I made a list once. I think it was 7 people that we knew who voted for Bernie in the primary and then voted for Donald Trump in the general election. And it wasn't that they were ideologues, although all of them had always voted Republican. They simply wanted to vote for the outsider who was going to blow up this corrupt system that Krystal and I were just talking about.
Well, I find that really tragic because I just found out recently that my brother, who was deployed to Afghanistan in 2018 under Donald Trump, was just diagnosed with PTSD.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. But my point, Jared, is that the many of the people who voted for Donald Trump because they thought he was an outsider who would change things in D.C. are now disillusioned because he really hasn't changed anything. People's pay hasn't gone up. The fat cat's got a big tax cut. Those Trump voters, I think, are very likely to become Sanders voters because he's viewed as an outsider just like Trump is. Jared, thanks a lot for the call. Yes, we need to get behind our candidates, particularly our progressive candidates, and help them win. It's 48 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Our free Hartmann Report podcast recaps the show every day. It's available wherever you find great podcasts. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters Series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. And welcome back. It's Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. And Keno in Lakeland, Florida. How's our favorite Republican doing today, Keno?
Yes, this is Keno from Lakeland with the Moose Herder Agenda and the Moose Herder Coalition Plan. And praise be for Free Speech TV and your program, Tom. I want Democrats to take heart because, now, symbolically speaking, if the Republican senators polish the boots of President Trump today, we have the 25th Amendment to fall back on because, you know, a bully always gets worse if he's promoted and allowed to do his stuff. So Trump will get worse and do worse things, but we do have the 25th Amendment, and some of the Republicans will join the Democrats eventually to declare him unfit. So take heart in that, and I would like to offer three suggestions. Today, when the vote is taken in the Senate, I want as many senators, Republicans, Democrats, to chant the name of John McCain. The way Trump talked about McCain reveals his true character. And that's what they need to be considering also is his character. So chant the name of John McCain often today, and they need to take two Lucky Charm things. They need to take a bottle of boot polish, and if the Republicans win, then they need to give it to Mitch McConnell as boot polish, because that's what they're going to be, boot polishers, and also a card that says "Dear Leader," and that'll be a Trump card they can give to him, because that's going to give Trump his Trump card, a Dear Leader. Yeah. And so the third thing is I need Mitt Romney. He can be prime minister in the Senate. He can have a coalition. He can supersede McConnell because he can be the prime minister of a coalition between Democrats and Republicans, and he needs to sing the praises of how Pence is going to be much better than Trump. Now, Pence is very defective, and he'll be a temporary leader.
Sure.
But Mitt Romney, he can be prime minister now. You know, symbolically speaking, he can head a coalition and supersede McConnell and praise how for temporarily. And this will be a cleansing and a purging. Of
I get it.
Country.
Keno, I get it. I hate to burst your bubble about the 25th Amendment, though. It requires the vice president to initiate the process, and a majority of the cabinet have to petition.
And
there's another way. You know, if you think Wilbur Ross and Betsy DeVos,
and it could include the presidents, it could ex-presidents, Obama and
no, that's not in the Constitution. But Keno, thank you for the call. I get it, and I'm with you. Thank you. Kate in Los Angeles. Hey, Kate, thanks for listening to KPFK. What's up?
Yes, thank you very much for your show, Tom. A couple nights ago, about 10:30, I heard what sounded like the beginning of like a political commercial. Mm-hmm. It had, that kind of generic music and everything. And then I heard, "Make America Great Again." And then there were like salt of the earth people saying, "Oh, my life has become so much better. I feel so much safer," with little interjections of, more political music.
Right.
And it was a commercial for a Trumpy bear doll.
Oh, the Trump teddy bear that they're selling. Yeah.
Yeah, and I got a chill because I thought, my God, there are adult people that are doing this.
And across Germany throughout the 30s, people had, Nazi flags in their windows and pictures of Hitler all over the place. And, this is called cult of personality. And it's neither healthy nor, for democracy nor for individual mental health. Kate, thanks for the heads up on that. That's fascinating. Ken in Woodbridge, Virginia. Hey, Ken, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I'm a first-time caller. I love your show.
Thank you. Thanks for listening on Sirius XM.
You can tell by now I've lost my voice from trying to explain things to Trump people, but I couldn't understand why, when you try to talk about facts, it's like they just didn't care. Mm. And it just dawned on me the reason why they don't care is they're still fighting the Civil War. They lost the Civil War.
Yeah, the lost cause.
And that's the reason why, that's their main goal. They're going to get everybody,
I agree, and I think that there's probably a significant percentage of these armed white men who would actually like to bring back slavery. I mean, they would go back before the Civil War. But I think your point is well taken, Ken, and I don't disagree, and that's the thing that troubles me so much. Thank you for the call, and thanks for pointing that out. Brian in Springfield, Missouri. Hey, Brian, what's up?
Hey, I just want to quickly fanboy on you for just a second. As I mentioned last time I called, being a blueberry and a strawberry patch, I don't get much in the way of progressive media. And just happened to hear on the Stephanie Miller show them just absolutely breathlessly singing your praises, both John Fugelsang and Stephanie Miller. You genuinely are, in my opinion, the smartest man in the room. So thank you for all you do.
Thank you, Brian. That's very sweet of them. Although John Fugelsang gives me a run for my money, I'll tell you. So does Stephanie, and they are so talented. And Stephanie's going to be with me in L.A. in 2 weeks when we're doing a fundraiser for KPFK. But anyhow, back to you. You wanted to make a point.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and yes, they are both brilliant. So my point is this: how, in your humble opinion, regardless who our nominee is, hopefully it is progressive, but even if it's not, how do we get Obama-level participation from the Democratic electorate writ large? I mean, honestly, how do we get that? How do we get those folks to get out and vote, get the souls to the polls at all? And I'll shut my mouth and listen. Thank you, sir.
Sure. Well, in psychology, and I wrote a book about this, The Psychology of Elections. It's called Cracking the Code, and it's about political messaging and communication. And in psychology, what they point out is that there's two ways to motivate people. You can either frighten them, scare them, or you can entice them. It's basically moving away from pain or moving toward pleasure. Those are the two things that are our principal motivation strategies. Moving toward pleasure is a little more gentle and far more long-lasting. Moving away from pain is very rapid. You touch a stove, you pull your hand back really fast, but it doesn't sustain over the long term. So I think that, with the Obama presidency, we were all moving toward pleasure. Oh my God, here's a healer, a statesman, a constitutional scholar, a good, decent man, and our first African-American president. We were all just, falling all over that and in love with that. With Trump now, we're afraid that this guy is going to become a Nazi. He's a fascist, or he's not going to become. He already is. I mean, what he said last night. He told the people of Iowa that Democrats want to kill them. And so I think that either one of those kinds of motivation strategies will produce Obama-level turnout. I have no doubt, Brian, in this election, there's going to be a massive Democratic turnout. The question is, are those people going to be given provisional ballots that never counted? Because the Republican secretaries of state have literally thrown millions of people off the voting rolls in the last year. We'll see how that shakes out. Brian, thanks for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Guns for Hire, how the CIA and U.S. Army recruit mercenaries for white Rhodesia. It's a historical reprint of what appears to be a 1979 pamphlet, basically. This is from the introduction. It does have an ISBN number. It is available in book sources. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, actually this must have been published post-1980 because they're referencing Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, 270,000 white settlers, mostly immigrated since World War II, controlled the government and economy, ruling over the 7 million black Africans. The Zimbabweans cannot vote. They have been forced off the bulk of the arable land, and they have no democratic rights whatsoever. All labor performance in Zimbabwe is black labor, and it is intensely exploited, often at less than subsistence wages. Zimbabweans have been fighting European invaders since the early 17th century. Since the 1890s, they have been directly ruled by Europeans, at first in the form of a private British corporation, the British South Africa Company. Since 1923, direct political rule has been in the hands of the white settlers, currently led by Ian Smith and his fascist Rhodesian Front Party. It's important to note that the white settlers were originally given this direct local power as a, quote, self-governing colony of the British government, thereby creating a master-caretaker relationship. During these past 80-odd years, Western imperialism, the multinational corporations of the United States, Britain, and South Africa, has extracted huge profits from the exploited and oppressed Zimbabwean population via the subsidiaries of the Anglo-Americans, Lonrho, AMAX, Union Carbide, Mobil, ITT, and other corporations. They fully intend to continue doing so as long as they can. The white settler minority has been rewarded for their violent subjugation of the Zimbabwean people with perhaps the highest national standard of living in the world. Sir Roy Walensky, the former Prime Minister of the Central African Federation, which included what is now Rhodesia, once said, "This man Smith has an appeal. It's the appeal of an easy life. For $6,000 a year, you can have 5 servants, a swimming pool, and a lot." Beginning during the early 1960s, however, the Zimbabwean nationalist forces under the leadership of the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, evolved the strategy of guerrilla war to liberate their people and land. It is proving to be very successful. There are 20,000 guerrillas in base camps in Tanzania and Mozambique, over 3,000 in Zimbabwe itself, and this number is continually rising. In a meeting between Stephen Solars, a U.S. congressman, and the ZANU guerrilla leaders, they were reported to reject the possibility of enlisting the assistance of Cuban or other foreign troops, declaring that if we cannot liberate ourselves, we do not deserve to be liberated. Despite Western propaganda to the effect that the U.S. and British only wish to avoid a bloodshed in Rhodesia, don't forget the Zimbabweans have been bleeding for almost a century, their real fear is that the liberation struggle will win. With this victory in sight, it is not surprising that the counterattack by the Smith regime has become more vicious and brutal. Actually, this must have been published pre-1980, because this is when Smith was still in power in Rhodesia. More than 250,000 rural Zimbabweans have been forced into concentration camps. Terrorist raids have been conducted against Zimbabwean refugees in Mozambique. Dusk to dawn shoot-on-sight curfews have been instituted and enforced in the border areas. And escalating counterinsurgency attacks have been launched against the military arm of the liberation struggle, the Zimbabwean People's Army, ZIPA. It is crucial for Westerners to understand that the Smith regime has not stood alone in this barbaric campaign. This pamphlet documents the critically important element in U.S. imperialism's support for the Smith regime, white mercenary reinforcements for the fascist Rhodesian, quote, security forces. This flow of U.S. mercenaries to prop up white Rhodesia is an important, though secret, part of U.S. imperialism's strategy for Africa. The U.S. has massive investments in southern Africa. Zimbabwe alone supplies the bulk of high-grade chrome ore used in the U.S. for jet engines and other advanced technological items. Coal, copper, and other minerals are ripped out of Zimbabwe for U.S. industry. Mobil Oil, Texaco, Hertz Rent-A-Cars, Holiday Inns, and many other U.S. corporations operate illegally in Rhodesia through foreign subsidiaries. More important still is South Africa, the fortress of U.S. interests in Africa, where $1.5 billion is invested by GM, IBM, Ford, and other giant multinational corporations. The liberation of Zimbabwe would, for the first time, penetrate the buffer zone of satellite countries protecting the borders of South Africa. South African guerrilla fighters, who are already training by the thousands in camps in Tanzania and Zambia, would have direct access to re-enter their land and accelerate the liberation struggle. Knowing that the stakes are high, U.S. imperialism has worked to strengthen the white supremacist outposts in Africa, although at times this had to be done covertly. In 1970, the Nixon White House approved Henry Kissinger's Operation Tar Baby strategy, based on Option 2 of the Secret National Security Study Memorandum Number 39, This strategy essentially called for covert military assistance, including direct exchanges, so the South African troops could be trained in the U.S. in specialized tactics and weapons. This would be done while the U.S. tried to convince Africans that it was on their side. This is from the pamphlet number 39, that Kissinger memorandum. We would maintain public opposition to racial oppression, but relax political isolation and economic restrictions without openly taking a position undermining the United Kingdom and the UN on Rhodesia. We would be more flexible in our attitudes toward the Smith regime. And it goes on from there. Guns for hire. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series, after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Daniel Judt is on the line with us. He's a contributor to The Nation magazine, where he's reporting a 3-part series on climate justice. His most recent, Australia is Burning, is the cover story for the February 10th issue of The Nation magazine. You can also find it online at thenation.com. And Daniel, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
Thanks for joining us. In your article, you point out that Australia was once positioned to be a leader in climate change. Now we've got, Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister, who denies climate change. You've got a majority of his party denying climate change, and you've got this woman who's a coal baron and the richest person in Australia funding many of these politicians, as well as, right-wing think tanks that deny climate change. What happened to Australia?
Yeah, what happened to Australia? It's a great question. And I think it's an important one to ask now as we consider the next decade of climate action, which the international scientists for the UN have told us is going to be the most important decade yet.
Yeah, because Australia might be coming to a town near you here any day now.
Exactly. And I think to understand what happened to Australia, you have to go back to 2007, which was really the key moment here. So in 2007, according to a poll by one of Australia's think tanks, 68% of Australians thought that climate change was an urgent issue that required immediate action, even if there were costs for that action. And as a result, there was a push in politics from both sides, the Labour Party, which is on the left, and the Liberal Party, which is the Australian Conservative Party, to bring a kind of carbon tax, effectively, into Australian politics. That fell apart in 2007. And since then, it's been downhill for the Liberal Party, which has become the party of climate denial, seized on the mantle of becoming the party of coal, which is a huge dynamic in Australian politics, even more than it is in American. And just to give you a sense of how profound the shift was, in 2012, that same poll found that only 36% of Australians thought that climate change was urgent and required immediate action. So it's really been, since 2007, a rapid decline in the country's ability to lead on climate
I believe,
policy.
the principal export of Australia, isn't it? Or certainly among the top 5.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So,
and they're also.
I'm sorry, finish your thought.
They're also, sorry, just to jump in, Tom, they're also the leading exporter of coal in the world as of 2018, and also the leading exporter of natural gas.
Wow. So what role, Kevin Rudd, the former Prime Minister of Australia, wrote an op-ed in the Sydney Morning Herald last year. And the title, the headline, kind of tells the whole thing. Rupert Murdoch is the cancer at the heart of Australian politics. That was the headline. And he talks about how Murdoch and his newspapers, he owns more than half the newspapers in Australia, both in absolute numbers and by circulation, as I recall. And that Murdoch's papers, basically, or Murdoch himself, basically kneecapped the left, or for that matter, the middle, in Australia. And then he moved to the United Kingdom, and he did the same thing there, with Maggie Thatcher and everything that followed. And then he moved to the United States and created Fox News in I believe it was in the late 1980s, early 1990s, and did the same thing to us. To what extent is this change in public opinion in Australia about the significance and horrors of global climate change and the need to act on it? You said it's gone from 2/3 support down to 1/3 support. To what extent is that attributable to this one cranky old billionaire?
Well, I should add that since 2012, that number that I was citing has gone closer back up to 60%. Okay. So there is some hope that maybe the direction is turning now.
Presumably because of the wildfires.
Right. Murdoch, presumably because of the wildfires, exactly. And Australia is on the front lines of climate change right now. Right. And everyone I talked to while I was there reporting this story knows that whether they relate it to climate change or not, this is different. And they've never seen anything like this before. That was absolutely universal. And that's something that even Murdoch's papers have trouble combating. So what they've done instead is shift to a different kind of climate denial. And this is something that Scott Morrison has done as well. Rather than claim that climate change doesn't exist or isn't causing these fires, they're doing two other things. First, they're claiming in Murdoch's papers and in the Liberal Party that climate change is happening, it is man-made, but it's not Australia's men and women who are making it. So Morrison will give you the statistics very often that 1.3% of the world's emissions are Australia's. So how can it possibly be their fault? And that obscures the fact that per capita, the country is one of the highest emitters in the world. And the second thing that they're doing is they are retroactively claiming that Australia has in fact acted on climate politics and doesn't need to act anymore. And to do that, they're citing some statistics from their pledges to international climate agreements like the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement that make it seem as though they're actually meeting their commitments to reduce emissions, when in reality, in the raw data, those emissions continue to go up. So one could say they're basically cooking the books.
Yeah, which doesn't surprise probably anybody, but it's really tragic. You said that public opinion is now back up above 50 or even 60% in favor of doing, or in favor of at least acknowledging climate change. Do you see, particularly given the ferocity of the wildfires that we've seen just in the last few months, I don't know if polls have been done in the last few weeks that would reflect any change in public opinion, but do you see the possibility that the Liberal Party, which is the Conservative Party in Australia, they use the word liberal the way Europeans do to mean basically libertarian, that the Liberal Party, right, the Conservative Liberal Party in Australia might have an epiphany and decide to start ignoring their big fossil fuel donors, particularly this coal baron?
It's a good question, and it's one that everyone in Australia is asking right now. Mm-hmm. I think we are a long way from seeing change in the Liberal Party on anything but the level of rhetoric. So, to give you an example, I talked in Australia to a lot of former fire chiefs. These are people who have been on the front lines of fighting fires for decades in Australia. In some case, up to 40, 45 years of their life spent fighting fires. They have tried as a group over the past 8 months to meet with the Morrison government to try and form an emergency council around bushfires, not even to push for more climate action, but just to figure out how to better prepare for the reality that this will be the summer Australia lives with in the years to come. Morrison has refused to meet with them. And I think that whatever rhetoric comes forward in the next few months, ultimately, this is an issue that the Liberal Party seems to have decided, like the Republicans in the United States, is going to be the issue that they will go down fighting on. And as far as change is concerned, it's going to have to come from activism, from work on the left in Australian politics, and from winning the next election.
Remarkable. Daniel Judt, his new piece is in The Nation magazine. TheNation.com is the website. It's a 3-part series on climate justice. This particular one that we were just discussing is titled Australia is Burning. It's the cover story of the February 10th issue of The Nation. Daniel, thanks for dropping by today.
Tom, thanks so much for having me.
It's my pleasure. It's been great talking with you. It's been very informative. I appreciate the reporting and look forward to more. Daniel Judt, and it's spelled Judt, by the way, if you want to check out his article. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Picking up your Anything Goes Friday calls right after this. It's 15 minutes past the hour. And welcome back, Craig in Half Moon Bay, California. Hey, Craig, what's on your mind today?
Well, I'm glad to hear you used to live on a sailboat. That's great, Tom. I'm sitting on the deck of one right now at anchor in the fog, thanking Mitch McConnell and the Republicans for allowing a presidential candidate to use foreign resources to win an election. Isn't that the ruling? Isn't that legal now?
That's what they're coming up with. So I guess Bernie can reach out to Denmark and Germany and France and Norway and Sweden and say, hey, you guys help me out here.
Well, I'm a climate-focused presidential candidate. Isn't that in our national interest?
I'm sorry, your phone is kind of distorted. You said I'm a what?
Yeah, I'm a climate-focused presidential candidate. So isn't that in our national interest? Isn't that legal now for me to go out and ask any nation I want, extinction foreign agents?
Apparently you can, Craig. I wouldn't recommend it, but apparently you can. Thanks a lot for the call. Albert in Minneapolis. Hey, Albert, what's up? Thanks for watching us on YouTube.
Yeah, you bet. Much respect, Mr. Hartmann.
Thank you
for hearing me.
Yeah, just fine.
I apologize if I missed this point, but I have yet to hear anybody talking about this phrase high crimes and misdemeanors. With the question that I have, why does it seem like everybody is reading the phrase high crimes and misdemeanors like it says high crimes and high misdemeanors? Doesn't the word misdemeanors imply that minor infractions are an issue as well?
Yes, if they involve, and you can go back and read the debates in the Constitutional Convention, which are constantly misquoted and quoted out of context by both Alan Dershowitz and the president's lawyers. You can go back and read those debates, and they made it very clear that one of the misdemeanors that they would consider, or one of the high crimes for that matter, was basically somebody failing to particularly with regard to foreign policy, failing to do what's in the interest of our country and instead doing something that's in the interest of other countries. And I think you could make a very, very strong case that kneecapping Ukraine is more in the interest of Russia than in the interest of the United States. And that's what Trump did.
Well, my
Until he got caught.
Revolved around the word misdemeanors, that as the head of the executive branch, shouldn't our president be held to the highest possible standards, not the lowest? That he should, or any president should be the exemplar of our laws, and even the lowest possible infractions really should warrant impeachment.
Well, that was the argument that the Republicans made back in 1998 or 99 when they impeached Clinton and for lying about a BJ, and that was. Their argument was that, he lied. Men and women all across America lie about affairs, particularly to their spouses. But, if they're in the public eye, it's, doubly destructive. And in fact, it turned out that, Bob Barr, who was one of the one of the lead prosecutors, and Livingston, one of the lead prosecutors, and Gingrich, one of the lead prosecutors, they were all having affairs at the time they were prosecuting Clinton. But anyhow, their argument was, yes, a misdemeanor like lying about sex, with another consenting adult, but out of wedlock, was such a sufficient mark of poor character that we shouldn't have such a man leading the country. The Republicans obviously have changed their tune since then, Albert, and, sadly. Anyhow, we'll see how it all plays out. It's 19 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls on Anything Goes Friday right after this. Our free Hartmann Report podcast recaps the show every day. It's available wherever you find great podcasts. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Mark in Woodstock, New York. Hey, Mark, thanks for listening to WIOF. What's up?
Hey, Tom, how are you today?
I'm great, but I'll get better. I hope the same is true for you.
Yep, I'm a 74-year-old longtime progressive going back to the same high school that Bernie Sanders went to, as did bunch of people. Bernie was a couple of years before me, Madison High School in Brooklyn, New York. The reason I'm calling about is I was listening to the Young Turks last night. I know you're having Cenk on a little later.
Yeah, in about 10 minutes.
Actually, Anna was talking about Joe Biden's lying about his civil rights record and admitting that he had lied in 1987. He said that in the 60s he was very involved in civil rights movement, where in 1987 he came out that he wasn't. Then he stayed away from it until recently, where he brought back his lies about being involved in the civil rights movement. Now, if he's going to be vetted if he's the candidate, he's going to be vetted by Trump and whatever other Republicans there are, and these lies are going to come out. You might want to talk to with Cenk about it, because it was on the Young Turks, and he'd give you probably better info.
This is the kind of thing, I guarantee you, Mark, every single one of the candidates has something that is going to come back to haunt them. And this is one of those things that's going to come back and haunt Joe Biden. But I really don't want to do the circular firing squad here on this show. I just don't want to get into it. Don in Vermilion, Ohio. Hey, Don, what's on your mind today?
How you doing, Tom?
Good.
I just called because I got some figures the other day about on a special that said that Donald Trump's tax breaks for the rich is going to be like $13 trillion in the next 10 years.
Yeah.
On top of the 20-some we got now.
Yeah, I think it was one of the federal agencies that just came out with that. I don't recall if it was the OMB or CRS or whichever one it was. But I read that in the Financial Times 2 days ago. $1 trillion deficits as far as the eye can see because of Trump's tax cuts.
And we're going to, because we pay that variable interest rates on our bonds, anybody's got any money in the stock market better make it right now and get out of it.
I am inclined to agree with you, Don, and get into the bond market, and for a whole bunch of reasons. But that's one of the big ones.
Well, the big reason I called you is that Trump is going to get totally forgiven by the Republicans, because the two guys running against him is in they wouldn't, was it 4 states, I think, they wouldn't let them start working in or something.
That's right.
You don't even hear from him.
Yeah, Trump's
he's the only one running.
That's functionally, you're absolutely right. And Bill Weld is out there, and there's a couple other guys out there saying that they're Republican candidates for president, and it gets them on TV, and it might revive their career a little bit or give them an opportunity to sell a book. But there is no serious opposition to Donald Trump. And in fact, let me add to that. And thanks, Don, for pointing out that tax break and the damage that it's going to do. But just to add to the whole, there is no serious opposition to Trump. People are wondering, why is it that Lamar Alexander this morning, he's the Tennessee, the senator, Republican senator from Tennessee, who is sitting in the seat that was previously held by Howard Baker of Tennessee, Republican of Tennessee, who was the guy who famously said, what did the president know and when did he know it? Howard Baker, who started out as a shill for Richard Nixon. It was his intent to shill for Richard Nixon in the Senate. But when he heard the evidence, he said, holy cow, this guy's actually guilty. And he changed his mind, and he became one of the advocates for impeaching or for removing Nixon from office if the trial ever got to the Senate. But in any case, Lamar Alexander came out this morning and said that, yes, he acknowledges that the House impeachment managers have demonstrated beyond any shadow of a doubt that Donald Trump tried to extort or bribe Ukraine. And Alexander did not use language quite as inflammatory as what I'm using, but basically that Trump tried to extort or bribe Zelensky and the country of Ukraine to come up with an announcement of an investigation into Joe Biden because he thought that would hurt Biden. That would be like Hillary's emails. Lamar Alexander acknowledged that this morning, but he said, I'm still going to vote for acquittal because I don't think that that's an impeachable offense. And people are wondering, why the hell is he doing this? He's already announced he's retiring. He's leaving office. Next January, he's going to be moving back to Tennessee and living there. And I can tell you why he's doing this and why the other Republican senators who are leaving office are also probably going to vote for Trump's acquittal. And it's because they're afraid. And they're afraid of the Trump fanatics with guns. Just let that sink in. They're afraid for their families. They're afraid for their future earnings potential, their careers. They're afraid that they'll be locked out of lobbying opportunities. They're afraid that they won't be hired by the big corporations that are very politically active and pay millions of dollars a year. But mostly they're afraid that crazies with guns are going to come after them. Mark my words. This is going to all come out. But this is what's going on. These guys, Trump has them whipped. He's got them living in terror, even the guys who are leaving. And if you look at Jeff Flake and Bob Corker, they have to have security details. They themselves are afraid. And they're still getting crap. And they're still getting threats. And so people like Lamar Alexander are looking around going, is it worth my wife getting death threats? Is it worth my children getting death threats? Is it worth having, crazies with guns like showed up at the pizza parlor in D.C. looking for Hillary's so-called pedophile ring? Is it worth having people with guns show up at our house? Is it worth getting yelled at in restaurants? I don't think so. So they're going to go along with the herd. This is exactly how people like Duterte in the Philippines, Modi in India, Hitler in Germany, Mussolini in Italy, Franco in Spain, Bolsonaro in Brazil, Duda in Poland, Orban in Hungary. This is exactly how these guys made the transition from being an elected leader in a democratic republic to being the autocratic dictator of a failed democracy. This is exactly how it happens. We're watching it in real time.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And Lisa Murkowski just came out and said basically the same thing as Lamar Alexander. You're seeing people who are terrified. And today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by Alan J. Lichtman, and it's titled Repeal the Second Amendment, The Case for a Safer America. This from the introduction, titled A Book That Must Be Written. On April 28, 1996, 28-year-old Martin Bryant stopped at an inn near his home of Newtown in Tasmania, Australia, and shot to death its two owners. He then drove to the former penal colony and tourist attraction of Port Arthur, where he lunched at a cafe. After eating, Bryant pulled from his sports bag a semi-automatic rifle with a 30-round magazine that he had legally purchased through a newspaper ad. With no provocation, he began firing at patrons in the cafe and its gift shop. Before the police stopped his shooting spree, Bryant had murdered 35 and wounded 18 others. His motive remains unknown. There were people everywhere, bodies, said witness Lynn Beavis. I thought at the time, being a nurse, I've seen dead people, I've seen blood, I've seen things like this, but what I saw in there, nobody but perhaps a soldier would know what that was like. The leadership of a shocked nation responded to the Port Arthur massacre not with thoughts and prayers, but with decisive action. The country's conservative-led government rebuffed their gun lobby and its American ally, the NRA, to adopt comprehensive national gun controls. In a 2015 broadside labeled "Australia, There Will Be Blood," the NRA charged that those regulations, which Australia significantly tightened as of 2002, have, quote, robbed Australians of their right to self-defense and empowered criminals. If the NRA was right, America, with its lax control over firearms for alleged self-defense, should be one of the world's safest countries, certainly far safer than Australia, where criminals presumably evade gun controls to prey on defenseless, law-abiding citizens. Yet in the latest reporting year, gun homicides claimed 14,542 American lives, compared to 27 in Australia. And all homicides took 19,510 American lives, compared to 222 in Australia. Since the NRA issued its warning, firearm homicides have declined in Australia, while soaring by 3,534 in the U.S. An American is now over 30 times more likely per capita than an Australian to be murdered by a gun, and 7 times more likely to be murdered by any means. If we had rates comparable today to Australia's, some 14,000 American lives would have been saved from firearm homicides in 2017 alone. By the gun lobby's twisted logic, Japan, which has one of the world's strictest gun control laws, should be drenched in innocent blood. Yet out of a population of 127 million, shooters in Japan murdered only 3 persons and injured only 5 in firearm assaults throughout 2017. Australia and Japan are not outliers. As compared to residents of our closest peer democracies in the G7 group of nations plus Australia, an American in 2017 was over 20 times more likely to die from a gun homicide. The gun lobby would have you forget that gun deaths are not limited to murders. In 2017, 23,854 Americans died from gun suicides, 64% more than were killed in firearm homicides. As compared to the peer nations, the 2017 per capita rate of firearm suicides in the United States was 7 times higher, while the rate of suicides by other means was 40% lower. These other democracies all have strict firearm regulations. None has a constitutional right to keep or bear arms, a distinction the United States shares worldwide only with Guatemala, whose gun murder rate is the 3rd highest of some 195 nations worldwide. Why has America lagged behind the democratic world in protecting its citizens from needless death and injury? The culprit is not spending by the NRA on campaigns and lobbying, which other pressure groups exceeded. The real problem is that which gun control advocates fear to name, the Second Amendment. Led by the NRA, the gun lobby exploits a historically defective, perverse reinvention of this amendment to inspire their grassroots supporters, sell guns, and provide constitutional cover for their opposition to making us safer by regulating firearms. The competing movement for gun control has floundered in response to the gun lobby's triumphant marketing of the Second Amendment. Gun control advocates have righteous zeal and noble motives, but lack a winning strategy. Instead of forthrightly refuting the lobby's bogus claims, the gun control movement has instead fallen into the trap of lamely insisting, we support the Second Amendment, but we also support responsible gun control. With such a self-defeating strategy, the movement can never win. It plays on the gun lobby's home turf and fails to rally the American majority that favors stricter firearms regulations. It provokes only scorn from a gun lobby that dismisses yes but assurances as rank hypocrisy, and it ignores the clear history and the true meaning of the Second Amendment itself. The movement for gun control must strike hard with a new strategy. Repeal of the Second Amendment is not only right, but realistic. It would break open the political logjam and open a path for the comprehensive national gun control and safety measures that have eluded the American people for so long. None of these measures would confiscate firearms or stop Americans from using guns for hunting, sport shooting, antique collecting, or legitimate self-defense. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of the free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. These form the Second Amendment. The book Repeal the Second Amendment by Alan J. Lichtman. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Hartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is my old buddy, Cenk Uygur. He's the host of the Young Turks, and he's also a candidate for Congress of the 25th District of California. His website, Cenk, it's spelled CENK2020.com. And, of course, you can tweet him at Cenk Uygur. Cenk, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me, Tom. Really appreciate it. Great to talk to you.
It's great talking to you. I was on your network earlier this week about my new book. I wanted to talk to you about this congressional race. It sounds like you're really rolling along on this. What is it like making the transition from talk show host essentially and network manager to political candidate, and how's it going?
It's amazing. It's going great, fascinating, and at times it's a roller coaster ride. And I've learned so much, Tom, that I didn't know even in covering politics for 25 years. So, for example, stuff that hasn't been, So, number one is for all that we talk about how the mainstream media is biased and has a establishment bias, a centrist bias, etc. And I always talk about how they have groupthink. I actually didn't know the degree to which that they are maliciously biased. So when I come out, I got smeared immediately by the New York Times, LA Times, CNN, and just about every other outlet. They pretended that I was a right-winger when their entire time that we've been doing the Young Turks, they've criticized me for being too far left-wing. And they would take things like my David Duke interview, where I called him a racist, an anti-Semite, and a loser. And they wrote it like I brought him on to share his racist views.
Oh, geez. I have interviewed David Duke and debated with him. I mean, it's been a few years now, but, they could do that to any of us.
Exactly. But, Tom, what was more disturbing, and by the way, the New York Times had to issue a correction because they were so dead wrong on it.
Yeah.
And it's not just that it was lazy journalism, and it's not just that it was groupthink. I told the reporters, and the LA Times reporter claimed he watched it, and the New York Times reporter claims he was going to watch it. Watch the interview. You will see that I eviscerate him. And they said, oh, yeah, absolutely. And then they wrote the opposite anyway. So it was an intentional smear. And not only that, when you read any of those articles, did it give you the context of my career? That would any of my audience have recognized that? Would any progressive leader, would anybody who's ever dealt with me or the Young Turks recognize who I am? No. And it's not just unfair to me. It's actually unfair to their readers, Tom.
And to the voters.
Yes. They give them a completely and purposely misleading impression of one of the candidates. Yeah, on the other hand, my opponent, who's a very conservative Democrat, nothing but glowing praise. She's in favor of fire departments. I mean, they write that with a straight face. Who's anti-fire department?
Right? Well, actually, I can tell you, Stephen Moore, the libertarian, on this program, he's argued that they should be privatized. But, and Trump wanted to put him in charge of the Fed.
That's right. So that's one learning from it that I was amazed by. There's a little bit of old school stuff here that I'm also amazed by. Our cars got broken into. Our staff is taped. They take pictures of my car and our offices. I didn't know that people were still doing that in the year 2020.
Yeah.
So apparently that still happens. And then the DCCC, the claims that they don't get involved in primaries. They got involved in our primary. They say they only back incumbents, and my opponent is not an incumbent. And they said they're doing red to blue, and our district's already blue. So they violated 3 different rules to spend a lot of money against a progressive candidate like me. So we're trying to counter them at Cenk2020.com. But, Tom, that's a lot of learnings in a short period of time.
I can imagine. So what I've been reading is that you're picking up volunteers, you're picking up, donors, you're picking up, that there's actually a lot of mojo behind your campaign and that you've got a serious chance of winning this thing. Am I getting this wrong?
No, you're 100% right, Tom. Let me give you the facts to back that up. So our numbers just came out. So Christy and I are basically tied. We raised about $800,000 apiece. She raised $840, so a little higher. I'm always honest about the reality. But she had 2-week head start on me, so I raised more per day. So people were stunned by that because she has all of the Democratic Party and all these different PACs backing her. And she just released her numbers. Of the numbers she made public, she appears to have only 600 humans who have donated to her, whereas I had 29,000 donations.
Wow, in one congressional district, which is a fairly small space compared to America. That's a big deal.
Yeah, and so to give you more perspective, Matt Gaetz, for example, raised $300,000 less than me in a bigger period of time, and he's one of the national Republican leaders.
Right.
So we're doing great there. We always welcome more because she still has more money because the DCCC is now coming in with hundreds of thousands of dollars on her side because they're panicked. So Cenk2020.com, I got to throw that plug in there.
Yep.
But in terms of the volunteers, oh my God, Tom, we have over 2,000 volunteers. Nobody's ever seen anything like this in a congressional race. And it's a special election. We did it on the fly. We didn't have time to build this up. It hasn't been an 18-month campaign.
Right.
It's barely been 2 months.
Oh, this is a special election. When's the election going to be?
So it's March 3rd, and this is like Rashida Tlaib's. Yeah, so there's 2 amazing parts of this, actually 3. One is that it's on Super Tuesday. So on March 3rd, we're going to find out if Bernie Sanders has won California, and we're going to find out if I'm the Democrat in the general election here.
Right.
Okay, and so if I'm going in and Bernie's going in, man, are we going to have a super strong progressive contingent?
You bet.
Yeah, and so it's a huge day in California. And then secondly, since this is a special election, we're on the ballot twice, which almost never happens. It only happened recently in Rashida Tlaib's election as well. So we're doing a primary for the special election. On the same day, we're doing a primary for the November election. And then the third amazing part of it is California just went to digital ballots. So everybody's got to know this for the presidential election, too, in the state of California. You now have to scroll down. It only shows you 4 candidates at a time. So Bernie Sanders is on the second page. He's the 8th candidate.
Oh, geez.
So, you can vote without realizing there are more candidates. So in the state of California, the only major candidate on the first page is Elizabeth Warren. So it is unbelievably misleading. For example, in my 2 elections, I'm number 12 and number 8. They have to scroll down multiple pages before they even find out I'm in the race.
Wow. That's incredible. I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of horror stories coming out of this. Cenk Uygur, the host of the Young Turks, his website, Cenk2020, is spelled C-E-N-K. Cenk, it's Cenk2020.com, of course. Cenk, I wish you the very best. It's great talking with you, my friend, and hope we have time to catch up one of these days when you're here or I'm in L.A. And thanks for dropping by.
Thank you so much, Tom. Really appreciate it.
Great talking with you. I really wish you the best.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It is so cool to see progressives getting out there and saying, okay, I'm going to run. I'll be frank with you. I don't have the courage to do it. I am so impressed by Cenk. And welcome back. Let's see here. Lou in Pueblo, Colorado. Hey, Lou, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Good afternoon. First, I'll say I do support Cenk. I'm a Cenk contributor, even though I don't ever get within 1,000 miles of him, because you get so much good out of his website.
Yeah.
But,
yeah, you're in Colorado. That's okay.
Yeah, well, close enough.
Yeah.
Anyway, I want to talk about the effective incentives on action, especially related to environmental. Now, a little bit of history, very little. I was intimately involved in the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, so I can't talk about some things about it, but I want to talk about incentives. Okay. Years ago, probably back when the Dead Sea was sick, the U.S. passed a fine of $1,200 a barrel for oil discharged into the water. Now, the wells in the area around the Deepwater Horizon are very high production wells, and they can easily produce 100,000 barrels a day. That's a $120 million a day fine.
Right.
The final solution that capped that well was proposed the very first day, but since the oil was being burned, any CEO that agreed to that solution would be taking on a $120 million a day fine for BP. That would be fatal to their career. So that they couldn't do it, even if they thought any chance of oil discharge in the water, and it made that pumping that dispersant in at the wellhead something that was cost effective versus paying for that oil to reach surface.
So let me understand this, Lou. Are you saying that by breaking up the oil basically with a dispersant and causing it to settle to the bottom of the ocean and vanish from our view, that they avoided paying fines for that oil because they did that? Because it seems like if they didn't want to be fined, they should just cap the damn well.
Well, you're never quite sure if your capping effort's going to work. What they did the 100th day was what was proposed the first day, and it did work, but you never know that when you go into it. Meanwhile, the rig was burning oil. The fine is for oil on the water. If you burn it or you disperse it, there's no fine.
Oh, jeez.
Okay, now let's move on to the next incentive, and this one's going to knock your socks off. The oil was $50 a barrel when that happened.
Right.
Very quickly, oil jumped to $75 a barrel. That extra $25 a barrel is pure profit for any oil producer because they're already producing
oil. On 10,000 other oil wells, yeah.
Right, well, BP produces 4 million barrels a day worldwide, so their profits as a result of that well went up $100 million a day. Now, that they didn't do it intentionally, but I guarantee you they didn't miss what happened.
The opportunity to cash in on it, yeah. Yeah.
And so they were making $700 million a week. If you go back, you can look at the headlines in the UK. Tony Blair actually went to BP because the board of directors, of course, they're in the UK.
Right.
They're not paying that much attention. They saw all this money, and they awarded the largest dividend in history for BP. And Tony Blair actually went to him and said, hey, guys, at least act like you're hurting.
Amazing. Lou, thank you for that. And thanks for watching Free Speech TV. That's amazing. We've got the most well-informed, smartest viewers and listeners in the world. Thank you. Our free Hartmann Report podcast recaps the show every day. It's available wherever you find great podcasts. And if you want to support the show, our full 3-hour podcasts are available by subscription over at ThomHartmann.com. Mike in Hope Sound, Florida. Hey, Mike, thanks for listening to SiriusXM. What's up?
Hey, Tom, it's Anything Goes Friday, right?
It is.
Well, let's make it an Anything Goes Tuesday when that State of the Union address is supposed to go off. And I want to know your opinion if Democrats should even show up. I understand the reasoning by if you don't show up, but I think this time in this country, it'd be great if Trump was talking to his enablers and maybe some Supreme Court justices who want to sit there and look like potted plants. But just want to get your opinion on that. And by the way, those Republicans who said, let's wrap this thing up, as far as the impeachment trial, that was one of the few times they were right, because even John Bolton or 20 more witnesses wouldn't have made a difference. So wrap it up. Let's get this joke over with.
Yeah.
Just your opinion on the State of the Union.
Sure. Yeah, Mike, thank you for the call. My thoughts on that are twofold. Number one, I know that the Democrats are not going to refuse to show up. There may be a few who will take a sort of principled stand, and there'll be a few who are out on the campaign trail and things like that. But it's just, that would be seen as disrespectful of the office as well as of the man. And I mean, this is a constitutionally mandated requirement that every year the president report to Congress on the State of the Union. It doesn't require that it be a speech, but it requires that the president do this every year, so they're going to show up. But there's breaking news on the John Bolton front, and I wanted to share this very quickly with you. This from the New York Times, a piece by Maggie Haberman and Michael Schmidt. It turns out that, you'll recall, Trump's phone call with Zelensky was in July 25th. But back in March, John Bolton, Pat Cipollone, one of the lawyers who is defending Trump right now in front of the Senate, Pat Cipollone, Rudy Giuliani, and Mick Mulvaney, and Donald Trump all met in the Oval Office. Trump, Bolton, Mulvaney, Cipollone, Giuliani. And in that meeting, Trump specifically told Bolton that he needed to call Vladimir Zelensky, the newly elected, this is right after the election, he needed to call the newly elected president of Ukraine, this is back in March, and tell him that he was not going to get military support from the United States until he started investigating Joe Biden. And the New York Times, the article writes, the previously undisclosed directive that Mr. Bolton describes would be the earliest known instance of Mr. Trump seeking to harness the power of the United States government to advance his pressure campaign against Ukraine, as he later did on the July call, that triggered the whistleblower and all that kind of stuff. So that's the latest breaking news. Whether that's going to influence any of the Republicans in the Senate or not, God only knows. Probably quite literally, but anyhow, that's it. Teresa in Santa Rosa, California. Hey, Teresa, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I want your opinion. What I need to know is, what do you think of a 1% federal wealth tax for the sole purpose of getting rid of the deficit? And it's another way of saying a war tax.
Yeah, Elizabeth Warren has proposed a wealth tax. Bernie Sanders has endorsed a wealth tax, and I'm not sure that he's specifically proposed one, but he may have. There's been so many things flying around, it's kind of hard to keep track of sometimes. But here's the simple reality, Teresa. Do you own a home?
No, sir.
Okay. You're renting, though, right?
30 years of rent.
Okay, so part of your rent is going to pay for the property taxes on the home or apartment that you live in. That is a wealth tax. We have a wealth tax in the United States, and it is mostly paid by people like you and me, people who are renting, people who own their homes, and in the form of property taxes. A property tax is a wealth tax on land and buildings. There is no similar wealth tax on stocks or bonds or savings accounts or piles of gold in a money bin. And so there is a wealth tax in America already, and it's administered mostly by the states and sometimes by cities as well, and it's called a property tax. And so, more than about half of my total wealth right now is my home. And that's true of most people my age and, who are homeowners. And not most, but many. For most Americans, their principal equity is their home. And particularly middle-class Americans. And for those Americans, if your principal equity is your home, you are paying a wealth tax every year when you pay your property taxes. But if you're a billionaire and you've got a money bin out back filled with gold doubloons, or you've got all your money in the stock market, and you pay no wealth tax whatsoever. You only pay, the only wealth tax you pay is the property tax on your home, and in some cases, they'll move to states where there's very, very low property taxes. So Teresa, thank you for the call. I absolutely support a wealth tax. I think it should be extended beyond just the property tax that middle class people pay, either indirectly via rent or directly as a property tax, and should extend to stocks and bonds as well. Very simple. Corinne in Grand Rapids. Am I pronouncing your name right?
Well, it's close, Corinne.
Corinne,
yes.
You're on the air.
And first, I want to thank you so much for your beautiful snow scenes that you keep showing us.
Oh yeah, that's Nate's good work. So tip of the hat to Nate Atwell, our video director.
Yes, and of course, thank you for your program always. But I'm not getting into all the issues you get into. I'm concerned about nuclear, particularly the Palisades plant that is over there about 70 miles upwind of us. And the problem is that Lake Michigan, they keep showing pictures of the cottages falling into Lake Michigan because of the beach erosion and the water raising.
Oh, my.
And what about the nuclear plant? Nobody mentions that.
Yeah.
Is it already lapping at the plant? And in the long run, not only would it liquefy the soil at the air.
Well, hang on just a second, Corinne. I know that they closed Indian Point, I believe it's called. The one up in Charlevoix. As a little kid, my brother and I used to sit. There was warm water that leaked out of that nuclear plant into Lake Michigan, and it created a little stream through the sand. And we used to sit in it because it was comfortable. We were probably being irradiated. But I know that plant closed down. Is there another nuclear plant on Lake Michigan?
Oh my, yes. Palisades is about 5 miles south of South Haven, and Cook is down towards Chicago, and each one is right next to, adjacent to, some kind of a state park.
Wow.
That has trailers and so on.
Wow.
And they also, Palisades has dry casks that are holding gobs of radioactive waste that they can't ship because there's no way to ship it over the highway.
Which is true of every nuclear plant in the country. I mean, this is insane and out of control. So the one that I was at was Big Rock, Sean tells me, in Charlevoix. It's a 60-year-old memory.
Well, but the point is that there's no news about what is or could happen to this plant. And since the water is going to get worse next year, and it was only 150 yards from the lakeshore when it was built,
now, Lake Michigan is not part of the oceans, and there's not glaciers melting into it. So Lake Michigan is not going up in its sea level, as it were, its lake level. But are you talking about storms? Is that these really, really severe storms that you're getting across the Midwest? Is that what's causing this erosion?
Well, it certainly could add to it, but particularly the lake itself is rising.
Oh, really?
And you see all
because of all the rain you're getting up there.
Well, I don't think it's rain. I think it's just plain that the level of the lake is rising.
Well, it's got to be rising from something. I mean, because it actually, it's above the level of the oceans, and so it feeds out through the St. Lawrence Seaway. There is water leading out to the ocean from Lake Michigan. That's fascinating. Corinne, thank you so much for the call. Sean Taylor, our executive producer, who has been with me on this show for 12 years, is going to take the next hour. She's going to be talking to you. Louise and I are heading out of town. So have a good time.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
book today is In Defense of Public Service by Cedric L. Alexander. The subtitle is How 22 Million Government Workers Will Save Our Republic. This is from Chapter 1, Civil Servants and Servant Leaders. Unelected public servants are found at all levels of government, federal, state, and local. But the modern model for all is found in the federal employment systems. More specifically, it is in the concept and operation of the federal civil service system, which governs the appointment and tenure of most federal workers. Those who believe that the unelected federal bureaucracy is a deep state covertly dedicated to the overthrow of elected government see the civil service as a fundamentally unconstitutional innovation, a monster of very recent creation. Such demonizing mythology aside, the truth is that the origin of the unelected government is found in the Constitution, under Section 2 of Article 2. The article defines the powers of the executive branch, and the second paragraph of its Section 2 assigns to the President the power to, quote, nominate and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, to appoint ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, judges of the Supreme Court, and all other officers of the United States whose appointments are not herein otherwise provided for and which shall be established by law. End quote. Thus, the President has the power to make all appointments not otherwise provided for in the Constitution. These are subject to the Senate's advice and consent unless Congress, by law, vests the appointment of such inferior officers as they may think proper in the President alone, in the courts of law, or in the heads of departments. End quote. In other words, the unelected government, which I have called the fourth branch, is rooted in the Constitution through the powers that it grants either to the President or to Congress. In turn, Congress may grant the President, the courts, or heads of departments the power to hire unelected public servants. In all cases, however, the creation of the unelected government flows from the Constitution, the supreme authority and originating law of the nation. The framers of the Constitution recognized that the elected government of our republic was not in itself sufficient to govern us. It cannot alone get government done. It does not alone possess all the expertise necessary to lead, let alone manage, so vast an enterprise as a nation. If this was true in the late 18th century, it's even truer in the 21st century geopolitical and technological environment that is far more complex, and that therefore requires a cadre of professionals possessing a wide variety of specialized skills, training, education, and experience. The Constitution does not call these appointments and hires a fourth branch, but that is what the federal service and other government workers constitute. De jure, in law, there is no fourth branch of U.S. government, yet it unquestionably exists de facto, in practice, in reality, in fact. Does the fourth branch compete with the three constitutionally established branches? No. It coexists with them as provided for in Section 2 of Article 2 of the Constitution itself. Those three constitutional branches are absolutely necessary to our republic, but they are not sufficient to it, as the framers acknowledged. Moreover, as I've already observed, for most people, most of the time, and in most situations, it is the member of the fourth branch who are, practically speaking, the government. They are the doers. They implement the policies created and interpreted by the three constitutional branches. What is more, although they do not decide or decree policy, they often influence it, not covertly, but by intention and design. The Constitution assigns the Senate the roles of advising on and consenting to most major presidential appointments, but members of the fourth branch do far more advising on a daily basis when it comes to providing the subject matter expertise and feedback necessary to formulate and modify policy decisions. As it turned out, following the coming into effect of the Constitution in 1789, the President, the chief executive, that is, the elected official responsible for faithfully executing the laws, directly or indirectly appointed the unelected personnel whom he deemed necessary to execute government. Most of the agencies in which personnel of the unelected government served were created by the executive branch under Article 2. And for a full 170 years after the Constitution was ratified, the President had the unquestioned authority to appoint and to terminate what were, in effect, employees of his branch, the executive branch. Indeed, in 1789, Congress explicitly voted by a narrow margin, that it had no authority of approval or disapproval of presidential decisions to terminate appointees. Only those few public positions that were independent of the executive branch, which today are known as independent agencies, were not subject to presidential appointment or termination. In 1829, Andrew Jackson took office as the 7th president of the United States. He was regarded as the apostle of the rights of the common man, and he made it clear that he intended to usher in an area of a more highly participatory democracy. During his 2 terms and under his influence, many states substantially extended the still males-only franchise by dropping property requirements from the ballot, and Johnson waged a mighty battle against the Second Bank of the United States in a successful effort to loosen credit and thereby free up sources for finance. In Defense of Public Service by Cedric Alexander. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the 3rd in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back to the 3rd hour of our program. If you were expecting Tom, it's Anything Goes Friday, and as Nate said, Tom has gone. I'm Sean Taylor. I'm Tom's producer, and I'll be taking your calls for the next hour. So call in. We can talk about any of the topics. It's Anything Goes Friday, so anything that's on your mind, I'm happy to talk about. Let's start off with Michael, who is listening on YouTube or watching on YouTube. Thank you. Hey, YouTube. He's calling from Nashville, Tennessee, and says here, Michael, that you want to know if we can file a lawsuit on behalf of the voting public. And I'm trying to get your call on the air here. 1 second. Let's see. There we go. I think. Nope. All right, let me figure this out, Michael. We're going to get you on the air. There we go. I think you're on the air. Michael, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Michael. So you want to know if we can file a lawsuit on behalf of the voting public?
Yeah, with everything that's coming out in the news, especially people keep hearing, and I keep hearing personally, that like 75% of the voting public want to hear from witnesses and hear testimony and evidence. And yet our Republican representatives are basically voting against that, essentially refusing to do the will of the people, which is what their taxpayer dollars are paying their jobs to do. Is there a way that they could be sued on behalf of the people, essentially to return the taxpayers' money to them for renders or services not rendered?
That's a great question. It's above me because I'm not a lawyer, but maybe we can get a lawyer to call in and answer that. Or, a good place to call to find out about that would be maybe the ACLU or Common Cause, who work on behalf of the public. They might be able to answer that one. Boy, I like the idea, though. And Lisa Murkowski just basically put the nail in the coffin last hour when she announced that she would be voting no as well. So
I had not heard that.
Yeah.
But when I heard about Lamar Alexander deciding not to do so, especially it infuriated me because the man is, in his last term. He has nothing to lose. He's not going to face any real quote-unquote punishment or backlash from his Republican constituents or anybody else in the Republican Party. He has nothing to lose to take up a stance and do the right thing and represent his state and the country. And it's just infuriating.
I understand that. From a public service perspective, you're absolutely right. But Tom was pointing out that he's probably deathly afraid of not just the, political backlash, but of actually someone doing harm to him or his family. The crazies out there that think Trump should be president forever. So it's we're entering some uncharted times ahead, I think, and I think a lot of people are going to be bummed out about what happened with the impeachment trial, but maybe we can turn this around. Let's all gear up for November. And in the meantime, what are you going to do to help make things better?
That was sort of the purpose of my question, because I know that the real answer is going to be to vote and vote these people out of office.
And tell everybody to get out and vote. And check to make sure you're still registered to vote, too, since so many states are purging the voting rolls.
Suddenly become such an issue, but yeah.
That's true.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Good call. And, hopefully someone will call in that knows the answer on that lawsuit question. That was a good one. Appreciate it. Let's go to Marilyn, who's watching us on podcast or listening on the podcast in France. Hi, Marilyn. How are you?
Hi, Sean. I'm listening on the phone. I normally listen on the podcast.
Great. And you wanted to talk about Russian oligarchs in what respect?
Yeah, this is in response to a conversation Tom had last week with Norma, who is in Alabama, I think. Mm-hmm. And they talked about the hold that the oligarchs possibly have over Trump, et cetera, but they didn't think it had anything to do with Putin. But I think it does have to do with Putin, because Putin actually controls the oligarchs. And I would like to recommend a podcast that explains it in intricate detail, and it is really complicated, but way back, right after Putin was first elected president, this was before 2000, he made an example of Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who was an oligarch, one of the early oligarchs. He had taken control of something or other, I can't remember what sort of industry in Russia. But he was against Putin politically, and Putin had him arrested and charged with tax fraud, which was a totally bogus thing. And I think he spent like 6 or 10 years in jail, and now he lives in Switzerland or something. And this is an example to the others. And the podcast, The Asset, explains all of it. It explains how Deripaska was humiliated by Putin, and how Putin basically tells them he permits them to be oligarchs, but they have to do his bidding.
Now, Deripaska is the one that just put a plant, or is putting a plant in Mitch McConnell's backyard.
That's right.
Yeah, putting a few dollars in his pocket, I'm sure.
Yes, there was a thing with Deripaska's aluminum factory or industry somehow, where the workers were on strike, and Putin went out there and humiliated Deripaska and made him basically just do whatever Putin wanted him to do, including give him back his pen. And there's just, it explains so much about how Trump got loans, sold that South Florida property for many times more than what it was worth, and a whole bunch of things.
Yep.
And the oligarchs don't do this because they all like Trump. It's because they're doing what Putin tells them to do.
Yeah. Well, it's not so much of a democracy over there. And hopefully...
No, it's not.
Hopefully we can change that in November here, too, so we can bring democracy back to where it should be, as opposed to...
I have my fingers crossed.
Yeah.
And even though I live in France, I do still vote, but I vote in Washington, which is pretty surely to be blue all the time.
Well, that's a good thing. We just got to turn a few more that way.
Washington State, yeah.
Yep. No, I got it. That's our neighbors to the north there. Marilyn, thank you for calling from France. That's nice to talk to you, and nice to hear your thoughts. I'm going to go now to Rob, who is, let's see, you're in Newport Beach, it says, and you want to talk about the legal definition of fascism?
Yes, I want to talk about the legal definition of fascism and how we're kind of in it now. Because of now Trump legally has with Roberts not calling witnesses, Trump now legally has the ability to do anything he wants to propagate his election, including extrajudicial assassinations like Soleimani and giving the Palestinian land to Israel.
Well,
so now he can. He's also helping Bibi, in Israel.
What we got to do is rein in the unbridled powers. We all kind of know from watching other places that like Duterte and I believe the Philippines and some of these other dictators, what happens in their countries, and we don't want that here. We chose something else, and it's up to us to make sure we keep that. So, again, get out and vote, get out in the streets, let people know what you think about all this. And Rob, I thank you for the call. Going to Deborah in Denver, who wants to talk about the witness question, the witnesses, blocking the witnesses. Deborah, hi, how are you? Listening on YouTube.
Thank you for taking my call.
Absolutely,
thanks for calling. To pieces. I learn a lot. So there's two simple solutions to the witness situation. Why don't the Democrats just filibuster the witness vote to get their way? They can filibuster it. They can, in fact, filibuster it and then say, we want a fair trial.
That's interesting. Are you calling all your representatives and senators and suggesting that?
Yeah, we notified. I called in and talked to Kana. And he said that he thought it was a great idea, but nobody's doing it. My husband contacted our Senator Crow, and nobody's talking about it. But it's so simple. If they would just filibuster the witness vote and say we're going to filibuster until you give us a fair trial.
Well,
and we want witnesses and documentation.
Let's all get on the phone this afternoon and start calling our representatives and senators and suggesting that.
Right, and there's another possible solution, and I can pose this question to you, or maybe you can pose it to somebody who would be able to answer this question.
Go ahead.
Can the Democrats offer a motion to block witnesses, which would fail 50-50 before the Republicans offer. Yeah, and so to block witnesses, which would fail at 50-50 before the Republicans offer their motion. If both motions fail, would that not produce a standoff that would force Justice Roberts to resolve it?
It just might. That's something else.
Not only that. Also, it would force the Republicans to be on record to block witnesses.
I like your idea. Good thinking.
Please get a hold of Nancy or somebody to get this out, because it's just making me sizzle inside, because they're leading us into dictatorship. They're leading us into fascism. They're so afraid of socialism, but they're leading us into dictatorship and fascism. He's going to get more and more powerful, and I kind of feel like they're cowards in letting us fall off the cliff.
Gotcha.
With a tyrant.
The best thing to do, Deborah, again, with both of those ideas, is to call your representative or your senator in D.C. and leave a message to that effect. And if I'm not mistaken, the number is 202-224-2131, I think. We'll check that out here in the break and mention it. I can't see it over here on the camera. It seems to have slipped off. So we'll find that number for you, and we'll be back taking more of your calls.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
More of your calls coming up next. I'm Sean Taylor, sitting in for Thom Hartmann on the Thom Hartmann Program. And we're back here, and it looks like Harry in Aurora, Colorado. You're watching on Free Speech TV. Thanks for watching on Free Speech TV. Harry, what is it you want to say here? Harry? Hello, Harry? Going once? All right, Harry is apparently watching his TV and not listening to the phone, so we're going to move on here. Let's see, we've got Brent in Columbus, Ohio. Brent, it's Anything Goes Friday. What's on your mind?
The Lamar Alexander piece that came out today, his explanation that he did it was unbecoming, but he's not going to impeach over that, not going to vote for witnesses, and he wants to leave it up to the American public. I am a lifelong Democrat, but I have a unique take on impeachment and democracy, which most people find unbecoming itself, but that's not the point. The point is the Constitution lays the responsibility of this squarely at the feet of the Senate. And trying to push it off onto the public is ducking your responsibility.
Good point.
Pardon me?
I said that's a great point. Have you called your senators and told them that?
Oh, yeah, Rob Portman and Sherrod Brown. I love Sherrod Brown, of
Sherrod
course. I've been supporting him for many years,
He's a wonderful person, good progressive. Comes on the program
absolutely.
from time to time. Yep, he's great.
Yeah. I was a local union president in Ohio, so I've been supported him for a long time. So, but it lays the responsibility squarely at the feet of the senators, and there's a reason for that. And I'm not saying this to downplay the American populace. I consider myself in this group. I'm not qualified to understand the complexities of all of the Federalist Papers and those kind of things. We employ these 100 people. They're supposed to be the greatest deliberative body in the world, and they're supposed to have the courage to make the correct decision, regardless of how it plays politically. And he's not even running again. I mean, if that person can't have a spine, I really fear for where their party is.
Well, I think we're being unfair to say doesn't have a spine. I'd like to have seen him vote yes, but if indeed he is afraid for his family, that I completely understand that. But, there comes a time when perhaps you have to put country first. Country and family go together. If you don't have a country, where's your family going to go? What's going to happen if democracy dies? We're all in trouble. So I don't know that there's time to change any minds. But if you feel like calling Lamar Alexander's office and leaving your thoughts there, feel free. That you never know. Maybe you can change his mind.
Absolutely true. Yep. That would be terrific.
And you just made the case for putting civics education back in the schools, too. So I thank you for that, Brent.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening on XM, and we'll be back shortly with more of your calls.
Our free Hartmann Report podcast recaps the show every day. It's available wherever you find great podcasts.
Welcome back. This is Thom Hartmann's program, and I'm Sean filling in. Charles in Miami, Florida, listening on XM. Hey, Charles, how are you today?
I guess I'm okay.
Well, good. I'm Sean. I'm sitting in for Thom. What's on your mind today?
Okay, it just seems like when Tom said that Lamar Alexander was scared for his family, I just disagree with. I sort of disagree with him. Okay, I can understand how you feel, but I think he's been part of this cabal that's been at it for since this. I'm gonna just put it out there since that we had Martin Luther King and desegregation. This is what this fight is all about. They're just trying to weaken the government. They've been at it for so many years that while we're looking like this, behind closed doors, they're partying. They created a Trump. They don't know how to control him. But this is what they've been going for years. It's just basically to push back our rights as far as minorities. And of course they don't want unions and they don't want to pay taxes. So I mean, how are you going to run a country if you don't want to pay your fair share of taxes?
That's right. Or stand up and do your job when you're called on to do it.
But I do have to blame Democrats as well for this, because I hate to say it like this, but I look at Tom and, and don't take it to the wrong way, but anybody that's not a minority can go to sleep tonight and think, well, we got to fight in November and we'll win. To a minority, that's not what we're seeing. To a minority, we're getting killed out here. And, of course, if you don't walk in my shoes, you don't understand what's going on, and you don't see the end game, because they told us the same thing in 2016. Oh, we'll get Merrick Garland back on the bench. All we have to do is vote. And they stole that vote. They stole it. They used voter suppression, and, of course, they used the Russians. So tell me, in 2020, do you think you're going to get a fair election or any type? And just in case that you wanted to get rid of a Trump, what if a Trump decided, I'm going to declare martial law? And all of this propaganda that he's been spewing for all of these years, he would just tell his people, you know what? All of these Democrats, like he did last night, they not only want to kill your cows, but they want to kill you too.
Yeah, we're in scary territory here.
Well, we're in scary territory, but we need a fight, and we need to stand up too, because
that's right.
We're going to lose it all.
Well, that comes back to the question Tom was asking earlier, which is, would you stand up to an oppressive regime, or would you conform? So, we're looking at that right now with what's happening in the Senate and seeing senators that are too afraid to do the right thing. So,
who have also been part of this, who love exactly what's going on. We're looking at senators who've constructed this. It's falling right into their plans. This is what they wanted all along. Stop falling for it, because you're too naive to think that all of these guys care about the Constitution and care about the good of all Americans.
That's why we have to. It's our duty to care. If they won't, we have to. So what I hope to see, Charles, is an overwhelming number of Democrats at the polls this November, and I hope everybody is checking to make sure that they're still registered to vote so they can vote, and don't accept those provisional ballots that don't, get counted. So tell everybody I'm going to. And Charles, I appreciate your call, and I hear what you're saying, and I thank you for calling in today. We'll be back with more of your calls after this quick break. I'm Sean, sitting in for Tom, who is heading out on vacation. So we'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And I'm still a little bit new at this, so bear with me and be gentle, okay? I don't know all the laws. Thank you.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment by yours truly. This is from Chapter 1, The Unholy Alliance of Racism, Genocide, and Guns. In Isaiah 14:21, the Lord tells Isaiah, "Prepare for his sons a place of slaughter because of the iniquity of their fathers." It's a variation on the old story of karma and seems in a very real way to be playing out today in the United States. America is facing an epidemic. Public health officials use that word of gun-related suicides, accidents, and even homicides and police killings. That epidemic has grown worse in the past decade, largely because the number of guns in America has increased, in large part because of the racial fears of white men who have bought guns in record numbers for 8 years during the time in office of America's first black president. A landmark 1999 study from researchers Franklin Zimmerman and Gordon Hawkins showed that the main correlation, far surpassing mental illness, socioeconomic status, or race, that could be defined as causal in predicting the rates of gun deaths is a simple number: the number of guns distributed among society. In the 30 years since that study, Zimmerman and Hawkins' results have been replicated and reanalyzed dozens of times. As the American Academy of Pediatrics said in a release published in AAAS's Science magazine, quote, new research shows dramatic differences in the number of children hospitalized and killed each year in the U.S. from firearm-related injuries based on their state's gun legislation, even after adjusting for poverty, unemployment, and education rates. It found twice as many pediatric firearm deaths in states with the most lenient gun regulations compared to states where gun laws are strictest, end quote. They added that this is a critical issue for children, quoting Stephanie Cho, MD, the lead author of the abstract, quote, firearm-related injuries are the second leading cause of death among children in the United States. But we found a clear discrepancy in where those deaths happen that corresponds with the strengths of states' firearm legislation. In states with lenient laws, children die at alarmingly greater rates, end quote. And unsurprisingly, America not only has unusually lenient gun laws, but also has more guns in civilian hands than any other country in the world. America has a bit more than 4% of the world's population, but holds almost 50% of all the guns in civilian hands worldwide, more than 390 million guns. And the more guns a society has, the more gun deaths it will experience. The NRA and their army of lobbyists have been quite successful in making this happen. During Obama's presidency, there was a steady and hysterical drumbeat of articles, emails, and political proclamations by so-called pro-gun politicians and think tanks, suggesting that Obama was preparing to take away everyone's guns at any minute. There was even a subtext embraced by the hard right that he wasn't going to stop there. After disarming white Americans, these folks said, Obama was going to intern them in otherwise unused FEMA camps. Flipped-out gun owners were repeatedly arrested during the Obama years trying to break into retired or temporarily vacant military facilities and toxic waste sites, looking for evidence to prove that Obama was, in fact, preparing the modern-day version of the World War II-era Japanese internment camps. White supremacy was the founding notion of this nation. White Europeans thought themselves so superior to the human beings they met here in 1492 that Columbus himself became the first North American slaver, shipping Taino Indians back to Spain as slaves to the royal family. A slave is as good as gold, Columbus wrote for the king and queen. Europeans in the Americas then stepped up that game into a hemisphere-wide campaign of racial genocide, pulling off the largest multi-generational mass murder in the history of the world. In the midst of that effort, they also created the legal mechanisms necessary to define and legally regulate slavery, and even built those systems into America's founding document, the Constitution. America was birthed in slavery and genocide, and both needed guns. It was the superior weaponry of guns that gave the European settlers a massive advantage over the bow and arrow-equipped Native Americans, and it was the raw power of widespread white ownership of guns in the South that propped up the institution of slavery for hundreds of years. Without guns, neither would have been possible, or at least neither would have been as easy as they were to pull off. And now, after centuries of guns being used to kill off and keep down people of color in America, those same guns are creating a terrifying epidemic of gun-facilitated violence, from public schools to private homes and public concerts. It's enough to make one think that Isaiah was onto something. Chapter 2, The Sanitized History of America. The United States' expansion and conquest in the late 18th century through the 19th century and into the 20th century is a history written by white men, inked in the blood of Native Americans, and built on the broken and bloody backs of enslaved people brought here from Africa. From 1791, when the Bill of Rights went into effect, until the end of the Civil War, the Second Amendment protected the rights only of white men to own guns. This is simply because until the ratification of the 14th Amendment, states determined who was recognized as a person protected under the Constitution. Initially, in most states, that meant that white men who owned land and paid taxes were the only people considered full citizens under the Constitution. In the South, white men with guns formed slave patrols to control slaves and formed posses to hunt escaped slaves. The book, The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment. Hey, my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, is arriving in bookstores on February 10th. More information is available at all fine bookstores. I cover how the heartbeat of democracy depends on the vote. This book goes into depth on the racist legacy of our vote and the unique struggles of African Americans, women, and Native Americans. In part 2, there's a deep dive into the economic royalist modern war on voting. And part 3 is the solution section, how to get out there and get active. I'm also on the road to the book tour for The Hidden History of Voting. Join me on Monday, February 17th in San Francisco for the Berkeley Arts and Letters series, on Wednesday, February 19th at Town Hall, Seattle, Sunday, February 23rd for the Blue State Ball in Minneapolis, Friday, February 28th at Powell's in Portland, and Sunday, March 1st in Chicago. More information is available at thomhartmann.com. This book is the third in the series after The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment and The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
I should just add, too, that Tom will be in Los Angeles with KPFK on the 15th as part of the book tour for the war on voting. And let's get back to your calls. It's Anything Goes Friday. I'm Sean, sitting in for Tom. Let's see here. What do we have? Kurt, you want to talk about, you're in LA on YouTube, listening on YouTube, illegal quid pro quo?
Yes, thanks for taking my call. I wanted to ask two quick questions. One, isn't it illegal or certainly undemocratic for a public official to even ask for foreign assistance, regardless of whether it's a government or there's a quid pro quo?
If you're talking about
Hillary or Barack Obama had gone on, a news conference and said, "Hey, China, if you're listening, everybody send me $2 who supports me." And my second question is, doesn't the Congress and Senate and White House normally do their due diligence before a funding bill is considered? In other words, wouldn't they investigate corruption before the bill's even brought up to see if the country qualifies?
Well, it seems, to my recollection,
corruption after the bill is
Kurt, to my recollection, that funding had already been released and vetted, so it was ready to go. It was up to the president at that point, if I'm not mistaken, to release the funds. Congress had already approved it. So,
well, correct. In other words, the vetting and the due diligence into corruption had already been done. Correct?
Well, apparently, right.
Okay, thank you. That's my point. I don't know why this issues come up.
Well, that's, they're not taking into account that we have a president who goes rogue every now and then, like he did on that one.
Exactly.
And also, and I'm going to let you go here, but thank you for the call. The question that a caller had earlier about whether or not the Democrats could filibuster, the filibuster has been suspended for the trial. Tom was nice enough to text me on that one. Thank you, Tom. So that is not a possibility. Right now, the debate is continuing over witnesses and the new Bolton report. Zoe Lofgren is up. She's the Democrat from California, and she is making the case right now about that. So we're keeping an eye on that. And just in case you were wondering, the coronavirus sell-off is what they're calling it on the stock market, and the stock market is down 520 points, it looks like, as of right now. It's kind of fluctuating between 5 and 515, 520, 515. So we're keeping an eye on that, too. And in the meantime, let's move on. I've got Doogie listening to WCPT in Chicago. Hey, Doogie, what's up?
Hey, how you doing?
Good.
Okay, I just want to, let's see, we had a few callers, so I want to recap on them. One guy said, now the first thing the guy that just called said about, the money. The money is, if the president refuses to release the money that's been appropriated by Congress, he needs to let Congress know. And so when people say that, well, Obama did it, okay, he alerted Congress that he's not going to release the money. So that's the violation.
Yeah.
So now the other thing is, as far as the person that called in and said, can they vote? Can they sue Mitch McConnell? Can they sue the Congress? As our good friend Norman Goldman used to say, no, we cannot. It's not a litigation.
Yeah.
It's not a litigation remedy. The remedy is at the ballot box. You have to vote. And so we did this to ourselves in 2016 because, Hillary wasn't good enough. That is the Democratic purity test, and we cannot have this in 2020. Now, we had Tom had a representative from California in the last hour, and he was correct on these brand new voting machines. Listening to the broadcast, this guy is really big on voter integrity. We have a serious problem that people need to realize is that there are new voting machines that are completely 100% electronic, not paper. They're hackable and they're unstable. And these voting machines are being implemented in states that are vulnerable, like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Florida, Ohio, and L.A. County. And these voting machines are very, very bad. And so now what's going on is we need to outperform and overperform in 2020 because we have voter suppression, we have gerrymandering, and we have these unverifiable voting machines. We are in a really big, huge crisis, and we need to outperform and overperform in 2020.
We need a huge turnout. We need to check and make sure everybody's on the voting rolls, that you're still registered, with voter purging, and get registered if you're not. If your state allows same-day registration even. If you have to wait till the last minute, you can do that in some states. So make sure you know what the rules of your state are. Call the Secretary of State's office, the Elections Division. They can answer your questions, and make sure you're registered. And Doogie, thank you for the call. I appreciate it. Thanks for listening. Going to Ken in Ohio, listening on Sirius XM. Thank you, Ken. Nice to talk to you. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Sean.
Hi, Ken.
The reason I'm calling is one reason that Trump may be reelected this fall is the strength of the economy. My question is, should those of us American consumers who do not want to see him reelected slow down our spending? For instance, put off a vacation or a new vehicle purchase until after the November election. What do you think?
I don't think that would really affect things that much. I think what we're doing right now, as Tom always says, is seeing the economy that basically Obama's policies put into place, and Trump's just been riding on that. So, what would be the point? We don't want to crash the economy either. That's not going to be good. And Trump may be setting that up for, just in case he doesn't get elected. So we'll have to wait and see. Ken, I appreciate the call, and thank you. We're moving on to Carl from WGRN, it says. Carl, welcome to the show.
Afternoon, I should say. Yes, on the topic of safety of legislators. Let me remind you what happened when George Weasel Bush apparently defeated John Kerry in 2004. You remember what Kerry did?
Remind me.
Well, do you remember what Al Gore did in 2000?
I do.
Al Gore fought back and argued, and
he did, and then ultimately conceded because it was tearing the country apart.
Well, that was the public story anyway. What did Kerry do? He left town. He left the country, like 2 days after he apparently lost the election. He left town. Now, this is not just for Democrats. I voted. I am Randy Rhodes' favorite conservative Darwinian Republican, and what I've come to realize is that there aren't very many Republicans left, just publicans. They do it to each other.
Well, it's time.
When I voted for John McCain, it was against George Bush in 2000.
Yep.
And I don't know if you remember, but there were scenes, broadcast of Bush putting his arm around McCain and trying to dominate him. And I believe it was... well, anyway.
Are you talking about when they were on the campaign trail together?
When they were competing with each other.
Okay, because McCain ultimately threw his support behind Bush, as I recall. In fact, I met both John McCain and George Bush in Portland at the Child Center when they were out here campaigning together, and McCain was campaigning for George Bush.
Well, what I don't think I heard very many people note was that there was this episode where Bush was trying to dominate with this bear hug, and McCain said, "Get your damned hands off of me."
That sounds like it could have happened. He's a pretty feisty man.
It was on TV. I saw the video clip.
Yeah.
And John McCain, I saw him lose his soul.
Well, hopefully he got it back at the end.
I knew then that one of
doing that healthcare vote that he did at the very late stage in his career when he was ill, I think said a lot. So I appreciate the call, and let's see, we're going to go to Dave on Sirius XM calling from Pittsburgh. Hi, Dave. What's on your mind?
Hello. Well, I just wanted to make a quick point here that I know a number of people are worried about, Trump suspending the elections, and I think the quickest counterpoint to that would be that during World War II, FDR never suspended the elections.
Right.
He went through the bloodiest time of American history, the Civil War. Lincoln never suspended elections. And anything short of, nuclear bombs dropping, I don't think Trump would really have much of a leg to stand on, and Congress would pretty much shut him down with it.
Unfortunately, we're not dealing with FDR or Lincoln here, though.
Yes, excellent statesman.
Yep.
And another thing that I find kind of amusing is, everybody's worried about, the president having too much power after FDR won, several times in a row. So they instituted the amendment, and I don't think we'd have Trump if, Obama could have ran again.
Well, yeah, but that didn't happen, isn't going to happen. So, I think we just got to get out and pick our candidates. Who do you want for president this year?
I've been a fan of Sanders for a number of years.
Awesome.
I've followed him with your show here.
Great.
And I'll go to the mat for him.
I think he or Elizabeth Warren are
Warren
both fine candidates.
I was going to say, Elizabeth Warren, I don't have quite as much.
Tara Lauren internship.
Linda on Sirius, calling about voting machines. You're in Toledo. What did you want to say about voting machines?
I want to say that I don't trust the voting machines. As the last couple callers said, they're not able to track votes. And I have been asking for paper ballots for about 3 years now. We can get them, and I encourage everyone to go back to paper ballots. Also, there was I don't know what they called it, on the voting rights where they took out that Amendment 5 or there was something voter 5. It was number 5 they took out.
Okay.
And that's how they've been able to suppress the vote. Can we get that put back in?
I'm not familiar with what you're talking about. You know what I'd like to see, though, Linda, is vote by mail. I wish we had that nationwide. Oregon and Washington are doing it, and other states I know are doing that. And I think that would be what would save us right there. Vote by mail. It's paper ballots. They have to be counted. So
in 2010, they took out this Section 5, or I don't know what they called it, but it was a number 5 in the Voting Rights Act. And that's why they have been able to do all of their suppression.
Gotcha. I'm going to look that up after we get done with the show today and educate myself. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Moving on to Roberta. You're on Free Speech TV. I'm taking your call a little bit too early here, I think, but I'm going to because I've got you. Proud of Democrats. What did you want to say?
Thank you. I just want to say how proud I am of the Democrats. They went in there knowing they were going to lose, but they stood up on their flying mics and they said, this we're not going to take any longer.
Yep.
We're going to have a voice, and we're going to say the American people should be proud. There's a profile of courage when you know you're going to go in there and lose.
Yeah, I gotta say you're right there, Roberta. Thank you for the call and for watching us on Free Speech TV. I couldn't be more proud of Adam Schiff. He's done just a fine job here.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Everything they throw at him, Adam Schiff comes back and he just puts them in their place, and very eloquently. I'm Sean. We'll be back with more of your calls. Vince on Free, watching us. Whoops, nope, I think I just dropped your call, Vince. Mario, I'll get to you after the break here. Chase, you're listening on YouTube. I can't see your call. Whoop. Okay, well, it doesn't look like we have any Free Speech TV calls right now, so hopefully we can get a couple more on the board here. So it's Anything Goes Friday, and we are talking about anything. Tom brought up a topic earlier. Would you stand up to an oppressive regime, or would you conform? How hard would it be for you to fight back? Would you give up everything that you needed or had, or were able to have, your job, your livelihood, your everything, your family, if you had to stand up for an oppressive regime? We've seen it done throughout history. Bringing up Germany in the 30s, we saw families divided, standing up to do the right thing on both sides and fight against oppression. Would you do that, or would you conform? What would you do? Rhoda, you're in Portland, Michigan? I didn't know they had one. Fear of Trump and terrorism, it says you want to talk about? What's on your mind?
Yes, because really, I was an English teacher. I taught a man for all seasons, and I taught the kids ethics, had them make up their own code of ethics. But I really and truly see it's not so much that they aren't ethical. Mm-hmm. They are, like Tom said earlier, they are afraid. This man is a mafia-style president, and that is why he's able to have all these people bend to his will. But I totally think that Adam Schiff is a voice crying in the wilderness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and they're trying hard, and I support them. I pray for them, and I really think that they're doing an excellent job. Actually, too good a job for the bums that sit in there in fear.
Mm-hmm.
McCarthy is no longer doing it. Lamar changed his mind, and they're doing it out of fear, because every single time Adam Schiff or somebody makes a really terribly important point, he instantly knows they have to stop for lunch, and he instantly knows they need a break. And so the meat and the discussion, and Schumer terrorized, not Schumer, McConnell terrorizes them. Do you remember so and so and so? And so they come back,
trying to divert things, and confuse the issues. I agree with you.
And put fear into their hearts. They have children, they have grandchildren.
Yep. I agree, and I agree. I think Adam Schiff is doing a fine job. And, when we talk about fear, we really have to think about what our founding fathers went through as well. The founders of this country had to be afraid for their families and their jobs and, their everything. They put everything on the line. They risked everything for democracy. And who are we not to with what they went through? And not only that, but all the people who fought in the wars in World War II, World War I. All these people.
Even now.
Who,
but they all need to read A Man for All Seasons again and again.
They do.
To understand your integrity, your honesty, your sense of ethics, your personal code of ethics, which should guide everyone.
And start with the Constitution, too. Read that once in a while.
Course. Yeah. Of course, I'm not misinterpreted.
I don't mean you. I mean everyone in general that questions it.
But those show which really turned and twisted things around.
Yes, I agree.
Rhoda, he shouldn't be there.
Thank you so much for your call. Well said. And thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. We'll be back in a few minutes with your calls, or just after this quick bump, actually, with more calls. It's Anything Goes Friday on the Thom Hartmann Program.
Our free Hartmann Report podcast recaps the show every day. It's available wherever you find great podcasts.
Yeah, I gotcha. we're back. Welcome back. It's Anything Goes Friday. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Sean, sitting in for Tom. And Mario, listening to us on WCPT in Illinois there. What is the name of your town, Mario?
Thank you. Mario, I'm Chicago, WCPT.
Chicago, very good. WCPT, we love you guys. You want to talk about NPR and Dershowitz. What do you want to say?
Yes. This morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, the person in NPR interviewed this guy from Florida. I say, wait a minute, this guy is supposed to be in the impeachment. Well, no, he's in Florida. So they went on and tried to explain the situation, what happened, and the guy goes on and on and on and on, and the person of NPR, he goes, no, wait a minute. Let me make a point here. If Donald Trump investigated you because you were caught with Epstein, with these teenagers having sex, that would be okay. The guy went berserk. And I'm very glad that somebody called him in the carpet right there. And he goes, no, that would be immoral. But he goes, well, this is what you're doing. You're defending him, and everything that he can do is all right, but now he's not all right doing this, right?
No.
So that was fantastic. But I want to answer to the gentleman that called that you cannot walk in his shoes because you don't have his shoes. Well, let me answer him. I hope he is listening. Martin Luther King walked in those shoes without stopping. And not just Martin Luther King, everybody was there, all colors and races, walking with him. I volunteer for Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. And I was broken heart that it happened that everybody that I was calling, it was easier to throw the towel because everything is fixed. No, we have to talk it over. And I want to ask him, in the last few days, how many people that he's been talking about getting out there, call your relatives. Every time I'm lying, every time on the phone, every time wherever I go, I find a way to talk to somebody, to get involved in politics.
Awesome.
To talk it over with the relatives.
Yeah.
To do something.
That's what it's going to take, Mario. That's exactly what it's going to take. Thank you for that. We have under a minute left, so I want to get one more call in here. Dale, watching us on Free Speech TV in Wisconsin. Dale, what's on your mind?
Hi. I wanted to talk about the Dershowitz defense. The Republicans are going to end up using that as a reason to let him off and, to acquit him. And he said that the abuse of power is not a reason for removing him from office. And he also said that Trump can use anything in the what he considers in the public's defense or whatever to let him, stay in office. So now the logical thing is if they let him off at the State of the Union, if he goes up there and he says he does the President Xi thing and says if I'm going to just declare myself president for life, then is that abuse of power? And is abuse of power on that level going to convince any Republicans to throw him out of office?
Well, in a normal world, it would be abuse of power. We're kind of through the looking glass on this one. So hang on to your voter registration. Just make sure you're registered. Get out there in November and let's change this. Let's make a difference. Let's get out there and get a good Democratic president elected. I'm Sean. You're listening to Tom's show, and that's it for this week. We'll see you next week. Have a great weekend, and tag You're It.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
book today is In Defense of Public Service by Cedric